May 40 here. So I was just reading a terrific book from 2019 by an author I discovered on Compact Mag. And I started subscribing to compactmag.com, and I found out that Christopher Caldwell was publishing there. And I just searched over to Compact Mag and found a new Christopher Caldwell column about the dangers of Donald Trump's strike in Iran, and if it's not just a one-off, and there's increasing evidence that this strike on Iran will not succeed as a one-off. There's abundant evidence that Iran's trying to reconstitute its nuclear program, how this could very well wreck Donald Trump's legacy and his second term and divide up his base. So those are the concerns of Christopher Caldwell, whose previous column on Compact was that while there might be much merit to Donald Trump's plan to reshore manufacturing, but the way he's going about it does not appear to be an effective way to go about things. So I discovered this political science academic, Darel E. Paul, on Compact Mag. He writes a regular column there. And so I started reading his 2019 book, From Tolerance to Equality, How Elites Brought America to Same-Sex Marriage. And it reminded me of a disturbing comment that I read in Steve Saylor's blog in the comments section there several years ago. And it said, well, if Jewish elites can so transform public opinion and public institutions so that same-sex marriage is now law of the land, there's absolutely nothing that they can't do. And as a convert to Judaism, I really don't want to think of Jews as instituting such radical social, cultural, and legal change in a country. It's going to cause anti-Semitism, mate. And then I started thinking about, well, the whole category of anti-Semitism, we're playing a dishonest game there because we never talk about anti-Gentilism. And just as many non-Jews have negative feelings about Jews, so too many Jews have negative feelings about non-Jews. And it's not like Jews are just entirely powerless people. I think to try to keep a more level and even playing field, a more honest and upfront playing field, instead of talking about anti-Semitism, we should just talk about anti-Jewish. Because different groups have different interests, and when those interests conflict, right, it would be normal to have negative feelings about a group that conflicts with your group. And so just as Jews are incentivized to have negative feelings about Palestinians and maybe even Muslims and Arabs due to the long conflict between the Jewish state and its neighbors, so too Muslims and Arabs and Palestinians have abundant logical, rational reasons why they're going to have some negative feelings about Jews. So just as there are many Jews who are anti-Palestinian, there are many Palestinians who are anti-Jewish. Just as many Israeli Jews, I would assume, wish that Palestinians would simply move or disappear. I'm sure at least an equally high proportion of Palestinians wish that Jewish Israelis would either move or disappear. And so you may think, oh, you're getting away with it if you can tilt the playing field, if you can choose the categories that work to the advantage of your team. But when other people, when outgroups who, let's say they're otherwise on the fence, disinterested, that they're not engaged in the fight, but when they recognize that you're trying to employ and deploy a tilted field, right, that is not good because that's going to activate them to become much more negative to your group than they would otherwise. So Darel E. Paul, here he is speaking 2 years ago on YouTube live stream.
And your book is called From Tolerance to Equality, where you take up that very question about elite acceptance of same-sex marriage, which, of course, as everyone knows, happened seemingly suddenly. Can you talk a little bit about what you explore in that book and some of your arguments?
Sure. So the book is a few years old now. It kind of takes us from the origins of this debate, particularly in the kind of 1970s, down to the mid-2010s. The book came out in 2018. And so the argument is really kind of contained in the subtitle, that the reason why the United States came to embrace same-sex marriage is that it came to understand the world in the way that the professional class does, and in particular the way that professionals really already had. And so the argument is in part a kind of a cultural story, but it's also a political story too. And so what I do in the book is use a lot of data and trace out the locations.
Right. If opposition to same-sex marriage automatically makes you a bad person, then you're going to drive a lot of the opposition underground, which may be good for your cause or may be bad.
Social locations of beliefs about same-sex marriage going back to the 1970s when polling organizations first started taking an interest in this, and kind of tracing it forward and seeing the historical evolution of these views and how they're located both socially, kind of in different social classes, but also geographically, regionally. And no surprise, I think that the places where you see same-sex marriage come in the earliest are also the places where you have the most professionals. The places where same-sex marriage comes in the latest is where you have the fewest professionals. So that's kind of the theme of the book overall. And arguing that it's not about the kind of increase of tolerance, it's really about the change in ideology that is rooted kind of in class and in class culture.
Yeah, I'm reminded of a statement by Admiral Rachel Levine, the noted transgender, Biden administration official, who recently said that tolerance is kind of a bad deal for, in Levine's case, transgender people. They don't want to be merely tolerated, they want to be affirmed. It seems like this paradigm where you go from asking for toleration to asking for something more substantive than toleration doesn't just apply to the issue of gay marriage. It seems like it could apply to other issues of identity that have become very salient since the rise of gay marriage and the eventual Obergefell decision. Would you say that what you found?
I empathize with Admiral Levine here. I don't just want to be tolerated, guys. I want to be affirmed. I want to be celebrated. All right. I want your love.
Found regarding gay marriage is something that applies, pretty easily to other issues of identity.
Yeah, I think so. Absolutely, John.
And it's clear that support and affirmation of same-sex marriage does not lead to increased tolerance, because attitudes towards same-sex marriage are inversely proportionate to attitudes towards traditional Christianity and Judaism. All right, gay rights and traditional Judaism and traditional Christianity are playing a zero-sum game. The more you support religious freedom, right, the less you can support gay rights. The more you support gay rights, the less you can support religious freedom. Right? If you support religious freedom legislation, it means that religious organizations are allowed to, God forbid, discriminate against gays and against same-sex marriage. So if you want to be authentic to a traditional understanding of Judaism and Christianity, you have to be hostile to notions such as same-sex marriage and to notions that sex between people of the same sex is just as holy and just as elevated and just as worthy and good and blessed by God as sex between a man and woman consecrated in the institution of heterosexual marriage and the traditional ideas of a nuclear family. So support for gay marriage does not equate to support for tolerance in general. It instead leads to decreased tolerance for the traditional expression of religion.
Heard the kind of language about equality and about affirmation and respect when Massachusetts was still debating this issue. The framing of it as a question of toleration was a political strategy. It was a political strategy designed to advance the particular goals and to disarm opponents, quite frankly. But the most honest people were saying it from the very earliest times, that it's really not about toleration. We don't want toleration.
So if you play a dishonest game that uses force to disarm your opponents, they're going to get mad and they're going to fight back. You may not like it. And the last time that we had this amount of celebration of gay rights and the transsexual identity was in Weimar, Germany. And remember, the reaction to that was not kind.
Toleration is not good enough. It needs to be affirmation. And affirmation is very much part of a bigger kind of cultural construct that I write a lot about that I call the therapeutic. And so same-sex marriage is a really important part of the growth and development of a particular kind of culture that is especially rooted in the university. But as we know, with social justice, wokeness, whatever we want to call this thing, comes out of the university and kind of winds up sweeping the whole country. And then going abroad too. And it's in pretty much every English-speaking country in the world now, thanks to what began in the American university.
Yeah, a while back we had a webinar on Philip Reef. The idea of the therapeutic is very much a theme that has come up again and again in the discussions that we've had, and of course was very prominent in that discussion. So I want to get to that, but I think it'd be helpful to frame that discussion by talking about a short piece you wrote in 2018, which provides us with the title of this talk, Diversity, a Managerial Ideology. So in that piece, you show how diversity is one of these elite ideologies. You return to this point in several of your later pieces, I note. And you say that the cynical explanation for why diversity has become so...
So, God forbid, many people are reacting to the managerial elite by saying, get your dick out of my ass, right? They don't like the way that civil rights legislation, for example, has brought the government into the most private of affairs, such as who you hire, who you fire, who you rent to, what your attitudes should be towards hot-button issues such as same-sex marriage. And the increasing power of this managerial elite and of the professional class in America in general has come at the expense of traditional ways of understanding life. One of the big shifts that I noticed, even at age 11 when I moved from Australia to America, was the much bigger emphasis that Americans placed on credentials, which gives much more power to the educated elite, to the managerial class. And this class, this elite, is overwhelmingly on the left, and they overwhelmingly use their power to promote their own interests at the interests of traditional Americans. And I'm not thrilled with that.
Such a catchphrase, such a rallying cry is maybe not sufficient. The explanation that says, well, people are looking out for their self-interest and diversity is beneficial.
Did you love the HRification of American society, where so much of what you say and do outside the workplace is now in reality very likely to cost you your job? And so many Americans who aren't on board with the work agenda, they have to limit to anything that they say publicly for fear of offending the woke who are in power, who dominate our institutions, who run HR departments, and who will hurt them.
Beneficial thing for certain university administrators to promote. You say that doesn't quite capture what's going on, and in part because it seems like leaders of our elite institutions aren't just
This is from the YouTube channel National Association of Scholars. They also interviewed Nathan Kofnas on this channel. It's worth subscribing to.
There's no evident cynicism in their embrace of this concept of diversity. A lot of them love the idea of diversity.
I'm not opposed to, I guess, what we'll call cynical arguments, material arguments. They're often good ones, and I think diversity is definitely a site of job creation for lots of people. And
so by the year 1970, virtually every state, I think 49 of America's 50 states, had anti-sodomy laws, where effectively it was illegal for men to have sex with men. But by 1993, only a minority of states had anti-sodomy laws, and then eventually in the 1990s, anti-sodomy laws were ruled illegal. That we've had such a gigantic transformation of public attitudes towards homosexuality, essentially from the 1990s on to today. So in December 1996, there was a Hawaii State Circuit Court judge who ruled that a strictly opposite-sex definition of marriage violated the state's constitutional commitment to equal protection. This is from Professor Darel Paul's 2019 book, From Tolerance to Equality, How Elites Brought America to Same-Sex Marriage. Now, public reaction to this was swift. It was decisive. The U.S. Congress passed and President Clinton signed into law the Defense of Marriage Act, and the overwhelming majority of Democrats, both in the House of Representatives and in the United States Senate, supported this act. And up until about 2011 or 2010, the Democratic Party elites opposed same-sex marriage. Now, one curious facet of the growing recognition and support for same-sex marriage is how corporate America has been way ahead of the American people when it comes to equality for gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgendered people. Why is it that American elites embrace same-sex marriage way before other Americans? And why is there still such a wide public divide on the issue, right? The most educated are the most supportive of same-sex marriage and gay rights. The least educated Americans are the least supportive. So doctors and psychiatrists and people in the mental health profession were the profession who traveled the most quickly towards supporting gay rights. So I think as far back as 1972, you had homosexuality defined as a mental illness, but by 1973, approximately, the Psychiatric Association had overturned that, and very quickly, the psychiatric and psychological professions became much more supportive of gay rights. Legal professions traveled a similar but slower path to doctors. They moved from being chief regulators and suppressors of homosexuality to ardent social champions of normalization. With the demise of the U.S. military's Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy in 2011, America's religious bodies became the last site of organized opposition to normalization of homosexuality in the United States. But out of all the major religious bodies in America, it was the most elite and the most educated who were the least opposed. And it was the least educated and least elite of America's religious bodies. So traditional Christianity and traditional Judaism were most opposed to gay rights, while the mainstream and liberal versions of Judaism and Christianity signed on with gay rights. Prior to the 1990s, corporate America didn't really talk about sexual orientation. And then in the news media, there was a dramatic change in the 1990s. So I think approximately between 1992 and 1994, the New York Times went from refusing to publish same-sex union announcements to, in the words of its public editor, presenting the social and cultural aspects of same-sex marriage in a tone of cheerleading. Right? The paper's articles on same-sex marriage served as an effective ad campaign for the gay marriage cause. Now, I don't believe we were born that we evolved to be gullible, and so I don't believe that all these articles changed public opinion. What they did do is that they provided incentives for people to stay quiet when they recognized that the side of power and elites was opposed to them. Same happened at the Washington Post. So in 2013, the Washington Post ombudsman said that journalists at the Washington Post have a hard time giving voice to those opposed to gay marriage. The middle class and the working class have always held much more negative views on homosexuality than do elites. And on university campuses, frequently the number one reason why university professors have negative views of traditional social conservatives is because these people have an opposition to the normalization of homosexuality, right? This is the key issue for elites. And it suddenly changed from toleration, right, to equality, right? Until about 2010, 2012, toleration was the elite's preferred frame for thinking about homosexuality. And then after about 2012, normalization and toleration fell out of fashion, and equality, right, is now the dominant frame of discourse. It's the civil rights issue of our era is an increasing talking point over the last 20 years. There was a Christian sociologist who produced a study circa 2004, and he found that gay parenting produced children who were worse off, whether in receiving public assistance, being unemployed, having affairs, being depressed, using drugs, being sexually promiscuous. And this claim was in open dissent from established research. It was downright seditious, and all hell broke loose. So all the peer-reviewed studies that showed it was awesome to have same-sex parents, right, there was very little opposition to those in the professions and in the academy. But as soon as there was one study that cast doubt on the beauties of same-sex marriage as a great place to raise kids, then all hell broke loose. So why do men settle down, get married, and have children? Because often they feel comfortable with the honor of a patriarchal society. When men understand themselves as being the head of a family, even if only in a symbolic or nominal sense, gives them more incentives to restrain their sexuality just to their spouse and to devote themselves to their children. So patriarchy is the time-tested way of having a society that domesticates men. It is not necessarily normal and natural for every man's goal to marry and to raise children and to be monogamous, right? Down through history, men have had many other pursuits, such as promiscuity, philosophy, live streaming, athletics, right? There have been all these other rivals to the good life. And having a wife and children, right, have often been so attractive that societies have had to use taxes on bachelors and all sorts of legal penalties for childless married couples to try to induce men to take on the role of husband and father. The only effective means that is time-tested is a patriarchal society where certain honor is given to men who restrain their sexuality to their female spouse and devote themselves to their spouse, to their female spouse, and to their children. So in a patriarchal society, men are honored by the state, by the law, by culture, by politics, by society, by their wives, by their children, for domesticating their impulses and for playing the social role of father and head of family. And as they become attached to their spouse and to their family, they contribute their economic and cultural capital to the formation of the next generation. Now, it's possible that American men will trade in their desire to be a father, to be the nominal head of a family, just to be an unsexed parent, or perhaps men will simply lose interest in monogamous heterosexual marriage and having children altogether. So right now, diversity is the reigning social and political ideal of our age. Diversity means, first of all, that we have very little in common with our fellow citizens. Why we should celebrate that is a mystery to me.
And so I think there's something there for sure. But you're right, John. I think that doesn't capture very much. And it doesn't capture what's, I think, most interesting and therefore what's most kind of challenging and dangerous about the ideology. It fits into an overarching worldview. And I think that's probably the best, maybe kind of layman's way of thinking about an ideology. It really is the way you think about the world, what the world is made up of, how do all the parts of the world fit together, how do I fit into the world, how can I be an actor and affect the world. All of this stuff is wrapped up in what I'd call ideology. So it's a managerial ideology, I argue that, because it very much suits not just the interests of managers, but it also suits the way they think of the world. And the world for a manager is made up of different kinds of groups. And they don't have to be the kinds of groups we think of, right? Racial groups in particular, but also sexes and gender identities and national identities and religions and all of this kind of stuff. Right? This has become just kind of common in the United States now. But if the world is made up of different kinds of groups, these groups don't spontaneously organize themselves.
And that's why you need managers. And that's why you have the managerial class assuming greater and greater degrees of power and intrusiveness in our current ideology of diversity that dominates the United States. So in his 2016 State of the Union address, Barack Obama identified diversity as the essence of American national identity. Among America's elites, diversity stands alongside liberty, equality, progress, and the family as obvious goods that no sane person could oppose. Effectively, the word diversity wears a halo. Reading here from Darel Paul's book. And corporate America wants us to believe that their embrace of diversity, right, it's just a matter of efficiency, productivity, and profitability. But there's no evidence that diversity promotes efficiency, productivity, and profitability. So you can't trust what people say because people don't usually say what they mean, and people don't usually mean what they say. So diversity is an ideology, is a set of practices, and it is a way for certain people to assume greater power over other people. Right? Managers and administrators love diversity because it is a particular version of their broader ideology of managerialism, that you need people like them to run society. Because we have all these cultural differences along lines of race, ethnicity, sex, sexual orientation. We have all these diverse groups. We have less and less in common with each other. It's very difficult for people with little in common with each other to interact in peaceful and productive ways. And bigotry, guys, prejudice, that just compounds the negative effect. So pluralism and promoting diversity offers a shining promise of higher productivity. If only we can reconcile these differences, we can achieve new pinnacles of cooperation, creativity, productivity, and social harmony. And this process is not natural, it's not automatic, so we need skilled, educated managers to create this good society. And so in a managerial society, we will have to put up with more intrusion, we will have less autonomy, less freedom of speech, less freedom of religion. But here's the great news, right? We're promised greater efficiency, greater creativity, greater productivity. Right, the enormous amount of human capital residing in our African American and diverse brothers and sisters will not go to waste. Right, bureaucracy will become the pathway to progress. And homosexuality symbolizes diversity. It is urban, it is edgy, it is hip, it's fashionable, it's successful, it's cosmopolitan, it's cool. Advertisers love the gay community because they want to construct an association between their products and gay people to suggest a particular kind of well-being, right? You want to cash in on the gay cachet, right? Homosexuality is a prestige category. It's a protected category, right? Not just in advertising, not just in entertainment, in all of society. So homosexuality is the ideal manifestation of the wonders and glories of diversity with its practices and ideology. So diversity is a tool of the elites to take power and to reshape society. It gives the professional, managerial, educated class many advantages over the less educated. And organizations now need diversity programs to identify promotables, all right? Those people who should be moved into leadership and cultivate their human capital to create elite status competition in our diverse and pluralistic world. So those who manage diversity, right, those who program, right, those who run things are exempt employees, right? They are exempt from the Federal Fair Labor Standards Act with its rules on minimum wages and overtime pay. So they are exempt from the normal employees, and diversity really only applies to salaried non-union workers in executive, administrative, professional, and outside sales roles, right? Corporations and universities are not trying to create a diverse secretary pool, a diverse kitchen staff, a diverse janitorial staff, a diverse shipping department, or a diverse landscaping crew. So the creative class loves the gay class because the gay class are symbols of creativity, cosmopolitanism, authenticity, toleration, and the reward of merit. The more educated you are, the more likely you are to express an LGBT identity. Right? Partnered gay men and partnered lesbians are highly overrepresented at the highest levels of the managerial and professional class. At the same time, America's most powerful managers and professionals are the least racially and ethnically diverse class in the country. So what we have here is the promotion of a particular type of identity, the gay, hyper-educated identity, not the biracial or ethnic or religious types of identity. So there is a fundamental conflict between gay rights and religious liberty. It's the zero-sum game. There's no mutually beneficial compromise. Right? There cannot be state neutrality between these two sides. As long as religious conservatives hold same-sex behavior to be less than morally ideal, and the pro-gay side hold it to be great, then every action and every inaction of the state is a choice to recognize one side against the other. And the entire history of religious freedom acts and the Supreme Court decisions have been battles in this larger and absolutely inescapable cultural and legal clash. So as gay rights have risen in status, right, religious freedom has declined in status. Right, so for the first time since the founding of the United States, the entire subject of religious freedom has shifted from the category of taken for granted to up for grabs. Now, from the beginning of the culture wars in the early 1990s, the number one critique by the elite is that they are a distraction. They are simply manufactured by conservatives for the purpose of division, that these wars are bogus and fake. The proper focus of politics is material. It's all about employment, income, taxes, the distribution of wealth, use of police and military force, and any turn to the symbolic is a betrayal of reality. But our hero systems are reality. I remember when I first bought a car. It was in something like July of 1985, and my family referred me to someone in the auto mechanics business to buy a car from him, and I ended up buying a 1966 Volkswagen Bug, and I absolutely fell in love with that car. And then in September, I was looking at my radio as I was driving, trying to tune the dial, and I ran smash into a parked school bus, and I wrecked my Bug, and cost me $900 to repair it. And the whole experience was just devastating to me because I had invested so much of myself in loving my car. We inevitably invest ourselves in our hero systems, in our church, in our synagogue, in our most prized possessions, in our phones, in our cars, right? If you love your car and your car gets keyed, right, you will feel hurt. It will cause tremendous pain to you because you have extended yourself into your prized possession, and we extend ourselves into our prized beliefs. So I want you to take a moment and have some empathy right now for what the mullahs and the people in power in Iran must be experiencing. If you count opportunity costs, right, they have expended trillions of dollars into their nuclear program that has been devastated. I could never love my first car the same way after I pranged it, right? There was something special when I only ever had sex with one woman, right? The first woman that I had sex with, that was a unique connection because I didn't and had not had sex, obviously, with anyone else. And then as I had sex with more and more people, it changed me. And when you love something and it's destroyed, just think about how the mullahs, love their nuclear program. They sacrifice so much for it, and now it's destroyed. Think about the pain that they must be going through and how that causes you to reconfigure your priorities, right? After I started having sex with my second woman, right, I started thinking much more about the world of sexual opportunities that was available to me. After I pranged my first car, right, I was not nearly as devoted to my car, and cars became more pragmatic to me. Women that I slept with started to take on a more pragmatic character, and it's entirely possible that the ruling regime in Iran may rethink its devotion to its nuclear program. Right? It just must have absolutely ripped their heart out. So we don't simply encounter reality, right? We perceive reality. We construct reality. We all have a hero system. We all have a way of looking at the world that takes the bewildering diversity that we encounter and puts it into understandable categories, right? So any form of categorization, right, essentially means to accuse. You can't make categories without making accusations, which is why people tend to take great offense when you categorize. And our educated elite increasingly dislike the religious fundamentalists because religious fundamentalists are intolerant, right? They want to subjugate women. They are low in intelligence and education. They are homophobic. They are irrational, and they are a threat to liberal values. So the anti-fundamentalist voters tend to be on the left. They tend to be more educated, rich, white, urban. They pay more attention than the average person to the news. They subscribe to the New York Times. They are more likely to be secular. And so there's one group who primarily stands in opposition of the veneration of gay identity, and that is the religious fundamentalists. So over the past 30 years, the status of the LGBT identity has steadily climbed, while the status of conservative Christians, conservative small c Jews, traditional Jews has steadily fallen. So what we have going on right now is a fight over the power to define, and categorize, and label reality. This is why we are fighting so hard. And to lose is to not just be consigned to the wrong side of history. It is to have the weight of the dominant culture pressed firmly against you, right? And to undermine your ability and your willingness to resist, right? It means that you'll be denied access to elite institutions and elite networks and elite positions and to all the material and social and intangible benefits they confer. It's to have the force of law and the power of the state used against you. And as someone who tends to right-wing views, I have felt this force building steadily over the past 30 years, despite the number of political victories that Republicans have had. You will have a very difficult time becoming a social worker if you are a traditional conservative Christian or Jew, right? The American Social Work Accreditation Body, the Council of Social Work Education, defines advancing human rights and social and economic and environmental justice as a core competency of the professional social worker. So any program hoping to be accredited must provide a learning environment that models affirmation and respect for diversity and difference and affirms and supports, right, gay identity and diverse identity. And many social work faculty have carried out this charge and clashed with evangelical students And while evangelicals have sometimes won some court battles, they can never get approved and accredited by those with the power in social work accreditation.
And they don't spontaneously cooperate. They need somebody to help them to realize all of these wonderful, as managers talk about.
So parang is an Aussie and perhaps an English slang word for collision, crash, a mistaken, idiotic one.
Today we can see here in corporations all the benefits of diversity, right? And so diversity is our strength. We know lots of these kinds of mantras. So in the managerial ideology, the manager is necessary to bring about these necessary forms of cooperation between groups that themselves can't really cooperate with one another. And therefore, the manager becomes absolutely essential. He's the central figure in the narrative of history, and his power, therefore, is essential for the common good. Because bringing all these different kinds of people together with different kinds of skills who can't necessarily cooperate well, but the manager is going to figure out how to do that and put all the pieces together and produce equity, produce efficiency, produce self-realization, creativity, all of these kinds of goals that are not just kind of professional class goals, but they're also managerial class goals too that we see in corporations today.
Yeah, so we often hear about the business or educational case for diversity. In the article, you say that, quote, the academic debate over diversity's impact on the bottom line is largely, well, academic. Can you briefly give an overview of kind of what we know about, how the concept of diversity is portrayed and what we actually can say about diversity, say, in the workplace, what it does for say, a corporation?
Sure. So I haven't kind of kept up devotedly with the literature on this topic over the last couple of years, but I can certainly speak to what the literature said maybe 3 years ago. Corporations have been dedicated to diversity, devoted to affirmative action, which is more or less the same thing. Not exactly, and we could talk about the differences if you want to later, but they've been devoted to this for a long time, right? Since the 1960s in the United States. So the belief under diversity is that you get a whole bunch of different people together and they can produce better sorts of outcomes than if you have all the same people together. And this might be relying on, psychological research about groupthink and whatnot. Better to have lots of different people with lots of different ideas around the table rather than a whole bunch of similar people with all the same ideas. It's kind of a sense, I guess, that seems to be probably right in some way. But there's lots of research, in fact, that indicates that there can be too much diversity too. You get too many people with too many different ideas, they just can't cooperate at all. So the simplistic understanding of diversity that you get out of the professionals and managers in America today is exactly that. It's very simplistic. It's not really rooted in the research. It's mostly rooted in ideology. It's rooted in what they want to believe about the world. There is not really very much good research that even indicates that diversity practices produce diversity, much less produce all the supposedly good outcomes of diversity, like creativity and efficiency and whatever else we have. And certainly corporations in America were never waiting to see, well, what does the research show? They have gotten into this from the earliest times. As I said, in the 1960s. And so any kind of academic research on this topic has just been trying to play catch up. And there's a lot of argument in this literature. And
so those who support a traditional definition of marriage, and down through history, there's never been a concept of same-sex marriage, right? No civilization has embraced same-sex marriage. It's not even a thing in history. Now, before the Supreme Court, I think in the Obergefell decision, was that 2015, struck down any opposition to same-sex marriage, supporters of traditional marriage had a very difficult time finding elite legal counsel to defend them. In 2009, California's Attorney General and its governor both refused to defend the state's opposite-sex-only marriage law from legal challenge. In 2013, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that without a defense of state law marshaled by a state agency, no legal defense of any kind will be allowed. In 2011, the Obama Justice Department declared the Federal Defense of Marriage Act unconstitutional, refused to defend it in court. And not one of America's top 200 law firms would represent traditional definition of marriage supporters. So not one. So if you are on the traditional side, if you see reality in traditional terms, if you see marriages between a man and a woman, you will feel, in all likelihood, great hostility towards the elite, the legal elite, the medical elite, the psychological and psychiatric elite, the social worker elite. And in approximately 2005, Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia claimed that the American legal profession was dominated by an anti-homosexual culture. And it's hard to say he was wrong. So if you are a judge, you essentially cannot refuse to conduct same-sex marriage, right? That is a violation of professional ethics in nearly all states, right? The American Bar Association has defined its model rule of professional conduct to define conduct that the lawyer knows is harassment or discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation and gender identity. That's professional misconduct. And not a single delegate to the American Bar Association annual meeting spoke against the measure from the floor. All forms of conservatism are rare on American college campuses, but social conservatism is the most rare. Right? Being a practicing Christian or an Orthodox Jew is more damaging to your prospects at an elite research institution than being a Republican or a woman. Evangelical Christians and Mormons are the least liked religious group at among American university faculty. After Arizona's Republican governor vetoed her state's Religious Freedom Act in 2014, Ross Douthat wrote in the New York Times that normalization of homosexuality had won the war. All that was left now was to receive the terms of our surrender. So what we have here is a fight over reality, right? Reality, again, is not passively perceived. It is actively constructed. If your reality is traditional Christianity or Judaism, you feel the weight of the elites pushing against you, right? What you feel to be natural, normal, obvious is the outcome of symbolic and cultural labor. It's an outcome of your hero system, which you normally receive from your community. So symbolic power isn't just a reflection of force, it is force. So who defines marriage? Woman, justice, equality, oppression, right? That is power. Whoever gets to define these terms shapes law, education, media, and even how we understand ourselves. I'm reading here from ChatGPT. So this is not a disagreement over abstractions. It is a high-stakes contest for cultural dominance. So categories are not neutral. Categories are accusation. To categorize someone as a bigot, an oppressor, a victim, a hero, or an ally is to position them within a moral drama that society is actively scripting. These labels carry tremendous consequences. If you're on the wrong side of these labels, you will face social ostracism, deplatforming, job loss, right? You'll be robbed of legal protection. So this fight is not just about what is true, but it's about who gets to determine what is true, who gets to narrate our most powerful stories, and what are the implications for power and for belonging. And to lose in this cultural struggle is not just to disagree, it is to be silenced, delegitimated, or erased. All right, this is Darel E. Paul, political science professor.
Not everybody agrees, which is typical, I guess, of what you'd say in academia. The point that I wanted to make with that section of my piece in Quillette is that managers don't care what the evidence is. What they care about is the political and ideological dividends that they think that they can get out of it.
And that's made evident by the, what corporations actually do. They embrace, ever more expansive DEI policies. When affirmative action is on the ballot or being challenged in court, they, as you've shown, they come out and almost exclusively support these kinds of policies, with maybe a few very rare exceptions where there's political pressure going in the other way.
Yeah, it's important, I think, to note that affirmative action, diversity, all of these kinds of programs have certainly been pushed on the private sector by the state. But I think that is...
I've always found the term gender to be just super gay and fake, right? Sex is a biological reality. Gender is a social construct. But I would want our social constructs to reflect biological reality. And in the case of 99.999% of people, the biological reality of their sex is very clear. So where is the battle for reality taking place in the most vivid way right now? So what is a woman? All right. Is gender a biological reality? I think it should be a biological reality rather than just a self-declared identity. We've got critical race theory. We've got fight over COVID. Was this a science-led response, or was it a political manipulation? Parental rights versus state control, right? Should parents be allowed to exempt their children from pro-gay indoctrination? So is the world on the brink of ecological collapse, demanding emergency, essentially totalitarian powers for elites, a massive transformation of our society? Or is climate change just another tool for elites to seize more power and to regulate our most intimate decisions? Right. So I think climate change might be real. I think the elites might be telling the truth about climate change. I also see them exploiting the reality of climate change to try to centralize and elevate their own status. Another vivid part of the war over reality is free speech versus harmful speech. So there's no strong, valid legal category in the United States, at least, for hate speech. There's no definition of hate speech where the Bible would not run afoul. So to me, and for I think most people on the right, hate speech is a fake, gay, non-existent category. Jordan Peterson got penalized by Canada's Psychology Licensing Board for political tweets. We have all sorts of comics, such as Dave Chappelle, who got protested or deplatformed. We had tech platforms throttling or banning content that they called hate speech. And often, hate speech was simply traditional definitions of marriage and sexual identity. Right? What was considered hate speech by our major tech platforms was simply the mainstream perspective on many different issues simply a decade prior.
Not getting anywhere close to understanding why all these things happen. So there are arguments out there, and I talk about some of those in an American Affairs piece that I published last year. I don't think this is a wholly wrong argument.
Yes, I heard that Z-Man died, and I didn't receive much benefit, or I didn't find much merit in his work. So his death doesn't have any meaning to me.
Not at all. But it doesn't get us very far because most corporations are going well above.
So this is what I would find unfulfilling in reading Z-Man or watching the documentaries of Adam Curtis or numerous other pundits, that they just make these sweeping, striking statements and feel no need to provide evidence for them. And I just don't find it worth my time. Curtis Yarvin is the same thing. He just makes these sweeping statements about topics where he doesn't know very much. I think the New Yorker did an excellent job revealing what an empty vessel, what an unintellectual pretender Curtis Yarvin is. I just don't get benefit from listening to Curtis Yarvin. Peter Thiel. Right? Most of the time when Peter Thiel is making pronouncements, he doesn't bother to provide evidence for them. I find it overwhelmingly a waste of time listening to Peter Thiel, particularly his thoughts on religion, Christianity, the apocalypse. I mean, if you want to be open about being gay and enjoying a promiscuous gay life, please don't start making pronouncements about what Christianity really means. All right, just, go be gay, but don't be devoting yourself to making pronouncements on the true meaning of the Bible. Right? The Bible is anti-gay. The Bible is bigoted. So these types, whether they're billionaires or bloggers, from Z-Man to Peter Thiel to Curtis Yarvin to Adam Curtis, who just make these sweeping statements without feeling any need to provide evidence for their sweeping statements, I just don't receive any benefit from listening to them. As opposed to, say, Charles Murray or Steve Saylor or Christopher Caldwell, who assemble abundant evidence for their positions. So when there are peoples or individuals who don't provide any benefit to me, I don't find a sense of loss when they're suffering or when they're no longer around, unless somehow there's like some intimate connection that we've had. So particularly when there's a battle to the death, for example, between the Jewish state and Palestinians, I don't lose sleep over Palestinian suffering, even though the Palestinians suffered tremendously. But while there's a battle to the death, right, I tend to side with my own group, and I tend to lack empathy for the outgroup.
And beyond what they are required to do by law to promote diversity. And you especially see that in higher education. They promote it not because they're forced to promote it, they promote it because they believe in it. Why do they believe in it? Not because there's a lot of great evidence that it works, that it produces some kinds of larger outcomes for society. They believe in it because it's...
So why do people like Adam Curtis Yarvin, Peter Thiel, the late Z-Man, why didn't they bother to provide much evidence for their opinions? Because that required work, and it also revealed them to be charlatans. I'm thinking about Neil Ferguson. He used to be a respectable academic, and he is rich, right? He could afford to hire graduate students to fact-check his ideas and his work, but that would limit the scope of his pronouncements. So he deliberately avoids accountability to reality and to facts, because that just gives him much wider scope to pronounce. Jordan Peterson, again, he's got the money to hire graduate students to serve as fact-checkers on his work, but that would limit his ability to pronounce. So for most pundits, most gurus who are successful, they often have the money and the resources to hire smart people to fact-check their work, but they don't bother to do that because that limits the scope of their creative expression and limits their scope to gain status and power and adulation and sexual access. And so the crowd that does not optimize for truth is not a crowd that I'm particularly interested in, right? And these people who don't bother to provide evidence for their opinions, all right, I think down deep, the reason they don't want to do that is because it would reveal that they can't do it, right? People do what they can, and when they can't, right, they do something different. And if they could assemble a compelling, empirically grounded basis for their opinions, they do that. But they know that deep inside that they're charlatans, and they simply don't want to be revealed for being charlatans.
It's part of their culture. It's part of their belief system. Sometimes I think it's worthwhile calling it a faith. It's their faith.
Yeah, and I want to get to that article soon. I think you're pointing to an article.
Yeah, I think that's weak when conservatives try to call wokeism a religion, right? The best definition of religion that I've heard means people interacting with a supernatural being or beings. And wokeism is not a religion. It is a hero system. So religion is a subset of hero systems. Wokeism is one hero system. Orthodox Judaism is another hero system. Reform Judaism, another hero system. And we all tend to inherit our hero systems. We very rarely develop our own hero system.
Argument that at least in some...
We essentially tend to parrot the hero system that's been given to us by our situation. Right? We rarely have any worldview of our own. We simply express things in reaction to the situation we find ourselves. Right? People tend to do the most advantageous thing for them in a particular situation. So if you're drinking a lot, it's because you found that that is the easiest and most adaptive way to deal with the situation that you find yourself in. You're probably lonely, probably lacked normal level of human connection. You feel bad about failing at life. You don't know how to deal with pain and frustration. And so you want to numb out. And some people will numb out through alcohol, others through buying stuff online, other people through the use of pornography or fantasy, or some people will numb out through excessive live streaming and blogging and social media posting, right? And you're doing the best you can to deal with the despair that you feel inside. And so most people with their political and social and cultural religious opinions, right, they express that which is most adaptive for them in the particular situation. People will tend to act in a way that they feel is most adaptive to the particular situation that they find themselves in.
Some circles of the right have become has become just extremely popular. This idea that, as Richard Hanania puts it, wokeness is just civil rights law. The origin of this kind of obsession with identity, these sort of dogmatic tenets about the the causes of disparities, all of these things that have created policies that many of us would find concerning. The argument is just that there's a kind of civil rights regime that's pushing all of this on corporations and to some extent on even, say, universities. And so it's interesting to me that you provide an alternative. And I think that,
So if you hate same-sex marriage, or you love same-sex marriage, if you venerate the traditional patriarchal notion of the nuclear family where the father is the least nominal head of family, or you loathe that, it just depends on your hero system, which you will inherit from your community or from the particular situation that you find yourself in. Now, I did not come up with the notion of hero system. Right? That was an idea that was developed in a great book called The Denial of Death by Ernest Becker. And Ernest Becker's point here is that our deepest fear is not death. Our deepest fear is that our life has no meaning or purpose. And so the way that we escape this deep fear is by imputing all sorts of value and power to the things that we are doing. And the only way that we can do that is through by taking a leap of faith. And we may take that leap of faith into a hero system that, say, venerates science, or venerates socialism, or feminism, or capitalism, or Orthodox Judaism, or evangelical Christianity, or jihad, right? By adopting a hero system, or recognizing our hero system and living it out so that our daily mundane choices have ultimate, eternal, transcendent meaning, right? We have latched on to a hero system. So this is the terror, to have emerged from nothing, right? To amount to nothing, right? And to have absolutely no significance, right? That our life will have no meaning. And to be aware of our mortality, and to keep on living, and to strive to be heroic, right? To take part in activities that lead us to believe that we are something greater than ourselves, that we are more than our physical body, that we will live on past our physical death, that we can have an immortality, right? And painters, great writers, right? They can achieve this immortality through the creation of their great work. But how do the masses of mediocre people, incapable of achieving anything great, how are they able to fulfill their urge to be heroic? Right? Society, community acts as the vehicle in which the overwhelming majority of people act out their need to be heroes. So, on a rational, empirical basis, heroism seems to be too big for us, that we are too small for it. We don't want to recognize or admit that we yearn to be heroic. So we disguise our struggle to be heroic by taking on beliefs, taking on a hero system that reflect privately our sense of heroic worth. So for some people, it's making money. For other people, it's getting married and having children. For other people, it's having a sports car. We all ache to be special in the cosmos, and we don't want to admit it. So we deny death by becoming fully absorbed in our own heroic role. And we strive for whatever our community and for whatever our society, for whatever the group of people who's most important to us deems as most desirable. So for some, it's the pursuit of money or fame or status, right? A society, a community is essentially a codified hero system, right? Society is a living myth of the significance of human life. It is a defiant creation of meaning in the face of an existential reality that denies meaning. Right? We need to deny death, and we need to feel heroic. Because without the denial of death and without the pursuit of heroic achievement, we will be overwhelmed by stress, anxiety, and depression, which can drive you mad. So what do you do when you have low self-esteem? You seek heroic transcendence of your fate. When you most doubt your own immortality, when you most doubt the abiding value of your life, right? That's when you most desperately need a hero system. And this is the thinking of Ernest Becker.
The fact that these organizations, whether they be corporations or universities, are just so enthusiastic about promoting DEI or about promoting diversity suggests that there's something else going on. And I want to get to that in a second, but maybe as a good question to expound on this a little bit, you talk about how diversity is in line with this sort of ideology of managerialism, and you also talk about how there's a therapeutic element. What is the connection between managerialism and what you call the therapeutic?
I think the most direct connection is in this claim of managerialism that it is not just producing good things for the world. That is, we engage in these managerial practices, we organize all these different people together so that they can cooperate better, and therefore we produce better products, new kinds of ideas, cheaper prices, productivity gains, all of that kind of stuff, which there is a claim that they do all that. But there's also a claim that they produce better outcomes for the individual employees themselves. And so for a long time.
So why do we have this revolt against the elites and elite institutions? Because rising inflation and more physical material returns to allowing a managerial elite do not compensate for the destruction to our hero systems. All right, the elite do not seem to be managing things in a way that is of benefit to us. Ergo, we have a revolt against elites.
Time managers in America have been saying things like bring your whole self to work, and that there's all kinds of lists out there in America, right? The 50 best places to work in America and all of these kinds of things. They're promising to employees that you can come and work for us and you won't just
the chat says 40 should have Matt Forney on to talk about the New York City mayoral race. Forney thinks that I did a terrible thing in splitting from Kevin Michael Grace, and so Forney has not spoken to me or responded to me since that time, which was, I think, early February of 2020.
Have things like a good work-home balance, or you won't just have like nice wages and benefits, right? Things that I guess, old-fashioned people were interested in. You will have self-fulfillment. You will have kind of life satisfaction. You will realize who you truly are through working for our company. You hear this especially in tech, but I think you hear it in lots of places too. But especially, right, for professionals, right? You're not going to tell somebody, you're not going to give somebody this line if they are, waiting on the front desk at a hotel, or if they are, a delivery driver for UPS. You're not going to realize your true self. But, maybe if you're a creative director of an art program or in advertising, or maybe you're in computer programming or something, this is a plausible claim. So that claim that you're going to have a kind of a life project that is going to be fulfilled through your work in.
So, yeah, many people get their primary meaning in life through their work. And so if that's you, you will have very strong incentives to align your hero system with that which will enable the most status and success for you and the greatest range for you to demonstrate how excellent you are through work. So I've been running many of these ideas through 3 major AI platforms: Grok, ChatGPT, and Gemini. And this is Grok's opinion that this work here by Darel Paul, he's a political scientist, meaning he is a social scientist. He says that this fight over same-sex marriage is nothing less than a fight over who will have the power to define reality. And winning means embedding your worldview into language, into law, into institutions, into media. Right? Losing means marginalization, where the dominant culture pressure dissenters to conform or face social, economic, and legal consequences. So elites shifted public perception from tolerance, merely accepting difference, to equality, where you need to affirm same-sex marriage as the moral equivalent to traditional marriage to be an acceptable person. So this wasn't just a legal victory, it was a redefinition of marriage, it was a reshaping of social norms and reality. So reality, once again, it is constructed, right? We don't just passively observe the world, we shape it through our choices in language, symbols, and categories. To categorize is to accuse. Categories are not neutral. Categories produce classes such as bigots, progressives, patriots, traitors, deviants. Right? Elites use media, education, professional, and legal systems to reframe same-sex marriage opponents as bigoted, intolerant, and so moderate supporters have been peeled away and traditionalists are isolated. And now we've got similar tactics appearing in debates over transgenderism, critical race theory, climate denialism, where dissenters are not just wrong, they are bad, they are evil. And the fight to define reality operates through these key mechanisms, through language, through framing, through institutions such as courts, schools, corporations, and media, and through social pressure. So you have online pylons and workplace diversity mandates. Now we've got new frontiers in the realm of sex, gender, and biology, and transgenderism with regard to race and history, technology and truth. And losers face marginalization, the erosion of cohesion. So groups will steadily lose members as moderates conform to the dominant narrative. So we see declining religious affiliation, because as gay rights increases in status, traditional religious affiliation decreases in status. And non-compliance with the left-wing agenda will likely lead to ostracism, lawsuits, and boycotts, and getting fired. So we have a zero-sum battle, right? Only one reality can dominate at a time. Now, in 2025, for the first time in memory, or at least since 2022, there is evidence that conservatives are starting to win a substantial, or having some success in a substantial number of these battles. Right? Under Donald Trump in 2025, for the first time, and under, first of all, I guess with Governor DeSantis in Florida, first time we're seeing a significant pushback by the right. And all three of the AI platforms noted that conservatives have been winning the battle to define reality in 2025.
Some particular corporation. That's the tide of the therapeutic. Because the therapeutic is a set of values and practices. I think at the center, right, is the self, and the claim that the self is going to be realized in society. As long as we can structure society the right way, every individual can realize his or her true self. And there's the connection, I think.
Yeah, and that makes me think there might also be a connection to higher education. And in your American Affairs article, you allude to this, maybe even explicitly, by saying that the structure of corporations for a long time has tried to imitate the structure of universities. Insofar, you even refer to large office complexes as campuses. Mm-hmm. You try to satisfy certain needs that go, as you said, far beyond the basic function of a corporation, just like universities increasingly do that. So I wonder if you can talk now.
So who are my heroes? I'd say Steve Saylor, Charles Murray, Christopher Caldwell, the late Ernest Vandenhaag, proponents of capital punishment for murder, and Donald Trump, I think, Stephen Miller, right? And the Russ Vought, the head of Trump's Office of Management and Budget, and Elon Musk for buying Twitter and restoring more freedom of speech on major social media.
Now, a little bit about the tie-in with universities. So you say that diversity is a managerial ideology. We have this kind of implicit managerialism in a lot of elite circles, just based on the class status of people, who happen to occupy elite positions. And then you say that that's, connected in some ways to the therapeutic culture that. And both of those things seem to have a connection.
So I don't have much patience for people who want to talk to me about their suicidal ideation, and I don't have much patience for people who want to tell me that we are doomed, meaning conservatives or traditionalists. Right? I don't have any patience for that. And in 2025, there are reasons to think that conservatives in America have been winning. Right? We have made gains with parental rights. The Supreme Court has ruled that parents can opt their children out of gay propaganda instruction. Right? Red states are pushing back on critical race theory and DEI curricula. Affirmative action and DEI is no longer cool. We have DEI rollbacks in the federal government. We have multiple executive orders dismantling DEI, gender-affirming care, Title IX gender identity protections across federal agencies. We have internal purges. We have funding cuts that are reshaping bureaucratic culture. Right? We are defunding left-wing elite media institutions such as NPR, PBS, Smithsonian, other arts agencies. Right? Corporate woke branding is in retreat. After Donald Trump won in November 2024, there are likely thousands of social media profiles that removed their pronouns. Now, the opposition has held ground. We've had courts issuing injunctions against Trump's trans bans and gender care restrictions for minors. We have left-wing media mobilizing protest against these conservative moves. Trump has been the leader in this war on woke, and MAGA largely supports his direction. So in education, we got the Supreme Court ruling with conservatives. We got Trump executive decisions in favor of conservatives, and we've got opposition in progressive districts. But the net trend is in favor of conservatives with regard to education and transgenderism and DEI and affirmative action, right? We've got executive orders and purging with regard to DEI and gender policy in favor of the conservative position. We have victories in cutting funds likely for elite left-wing institutions such as PBS. And in corporate branding, they are stepping back from promoting the woke agenda. So overall, conservatives have gained the upper hand in shaping public symbols, institutions, and federal policy, and they are winning the definitional skirmishes of reality, right, on multiple fronts. And Trump has positioned himself as the chief arbiter of reality. His sweeping orders, he's not just enacting policy, he is redefining norms, he is redefining our culture, he is redefining our conversations. He is deploying spectacle to redirect attention and to assert that he is in command. So Donald Trump is embodying and amplifying these battles, right? Trump and conservatives have been winning key battles on cultural, media, education, and federal policy. Not decisive victories, but winning. So that was the analysis from ChatGPT. So it's not complete dominance. It's successfully advancing a narrative. It is enacting policies that align with a particular reality. So this is Google's Gemini AI tool. Says that conservatives are winning in advancing a patriotic narrative, that conservatives are redefining how American history is taught and presented. They are promoting a solemn and uplifting view of America's heritage. Institutional influence. So Aaron, who's that Christian thinker that I've come to admire? Aaron, he said essentially that the right can only take over institutions. Aaron Wren. He says the right can only take over institutions from the top down because of the dominance in high human capital by the left. And so Governor Ron DeSantis has led the way in showing how the right can take over institutions from the top and then move down. That's what Elon Musk did with Twitter. He took over from the top and then made changes that rippled down. Executive orders have transformed our conversation. Donald Trump is exerting tremendous influence over many cultural institutions, such as museums and educational bodies. And there's been successful pushback against the transgender identity. And let's bring Michael back onto the show. What's going on, Michael?
40, how are you?
I am blessed, bro.
Great. So, I would also put Elon Musk as part of my hero system. However, I'm kind of nudging towards your view, which is that his break with Trump or not being in the administration was kind of inevitable. And I'll tell you why I'm changing my mind on that a little bit. So here is what Musk tweeted yesterday. Quote, "The latest Senate draft bill will destroy millions of jobs in America and cause immense strategic harm to our country. Utterly insane and destructive, it gives handouts to industries of the past while severely damaging industries of the future." So basically he's confirming what everybody said. Number one, that he seems to oppose the bill based on how it affects his business, which is kind of what Trump said in the first place. And number two, he's almost affirming what liberals say, which is that Musk's involvement in the Trump administration was some kind of maniacal plot for a billionaire to control literally the United States government.
So I don't think people are that easily categorized. I think everything you just said is true, but I just simply don't think that that's the end of the matter. So Elon Musk, like Donald Trump, like you and like me, is self-interested, blinded often to his pursuit of self-interest. But we aren't just self-interested. I don't think you can say that Elon Musk is only self-interested. So we are self-interested to varying degrees. I heard that one economist once wrote a paper proposing that the average person is 95% self-interested. And so I think that's probably likely to be true of Elon Musk. And if the average person perhaps was significantly less than 95% self-interested, that would be an evolutionary disadvantage, because you would not be able to operate in your own interest nearly as successfully. On the other hand, if you were if you were more than 95%, well, either way, if you don't cooperate with other people and take them into consideration to some degree, it'll make you less effective in life and less likely to propagate and to have children and to pass on your genes. So probably 95% is probably the sweet spot. And if you have a history of selfishness, such as myself, I may try to move that needle to say 92% selfish, to kind of make up for my own selfish inclinations that have acted in a way that is maladaptive for my own best interests. But I think to assume that Elon Musk is 95% self-interested, or any public figure is 95% self-interested, or to assume that anyone that you deal with in private life is likely 95% self-interested, that's a pretty good gauge of reality. And that also leaves open that 5% of them may be directed in ways other than purely self-interested. What do you think?
Well, that's exactly the proposition of him getting into the government. And what his critics said was that he would be motivated by self-interest. Whereas if you're going to be a good leader, then obviously you're supposed to put your self-interest aside and do what's good for the country. And I think that's why a lot of people admire President Trump, is because although, as you say, we're 95% self-interested, he perhaps has, in some instances at least, gone against his own economic self-interest. Maybe he wants the glory of being the most powerful person as president. But be that as it may, that we're all motivated by self-interest, he did tend to confirm his critics, which is that you have a business interest, and therefore you're just not even capable of acting on behalf of the American people. And in this case, that seems to be true. He's more interested in Tesla than kind of getting on the team. And furthermore, I'm not saying Elon Musk is therefore a bad person. I'm just saying it would seem that it was inevitable that he was not going to be on this administration and on this team, because another thing is that you can't be against the big, beautiful bill and then also be like on Trump's team, because this is such a big piece of legislation that you're basically opposing the Trump administration if you're against this.
So I want to agree with Trump's critics in that I can't remember any president who has so enriched himself via corrupt means than Donald Trump with his meme coin, etc. Two, there are seasons in a man's life. This is a talk that I heard from her quote-unquote relationship expert, Alison Armstrong, which I think is profoundly true and meets my understanding of reality, that essentially men between about the age of 25 and their late 30s are primarily devoted to building their kingdom. And then as they move through their late 30s into their 40s, their focus starts widening to encompass spending more time with children and other concerns aside from building their kingdom. And then by the time men get into their 50s, they put even more emphasis on children, community, friends, and even philanthropic endeavors. And as men move through their 50s and 60s, they increasingly want recognition for what they have accomplished, and they are more in need of recognition. They're more thirsty for recognition. And so I think much of the difference that you just discussed is a difference in the seasons of a man's life. So Donald Trump is 78, 79 years of age. And by the time people reach that age, they have a much more intense desire for affirmation, and they have a much broader range of concerns than someone who is Elon Musk's age. And so I think Donald Trump really wants to go down in history. He wants to be seen as a great president, and this dominates his concerns. Well, I believe that Elon Musk is still in his 50s, so he's putting much more emphasis on building and protecting his own businesses. And though he does have philanthropic and humanitarian concerns and does want to go down in history and does want to be praised and acknowledged for his accomplishments, that this is not nearly as intense as it is for someone who is 78 years of age. So I think there's a difference in the seasons of a man's life. And I think that there are also situations. And so I think that Elon Musk became intoxicated with his ability to wield power over the federal government. And so it can be self-interested to wield power in what you see as a positive direction for the federal government. And so self-interest can extend to that. And I think that is how Elon Musk experienced it. But then when he started receiving tremendous blowback and criticism, and often very accurate and devastating criticism, because in some ways he was not very good at what he was doing, that hurt his ego, and his philanthropic and humanitarian concerns were deflated by the very accurate criticism that he received. And often people take on philanthropic endeavors they simply don't have the constitution to see through. People often imagine themselves as heroes, but then they are unwilling to pay the price of being a hero. And I think eventually Elon Musk, when the price of engaging in his what he saw as a heroic transformation of the federal government exceeded the benefits to him, then he started backing away and moving to other endeavors. I think we all grow towards whatever endeavor will bring us the most love, that we all grow towards love like a plant grows towards sunshine. And Elon Musk was initially receiving, I think, a rush, a biochemical internal rush that may have even been more intense than the drugs that he has indulged in from trying to exercise power over the federal government. But then the effects of that drug rush diminished, and so he then switched his focus looking for other realms where he can receive that biochemical rush. And he probably had a visceral biological memory of how he received biochemical rush for achieving success in his various businesses. And after the rush died, right after the thrill was gone from changing the federal government, he switched to other endeavors where he could regain that thrill. And he's getting a thrill from being anti the big, beautiful bill. So while he was exercising power and receiving a thrill from playing on the team, he played on the team. But when the biochemical rush became greater for leaving the team, he left the team. And I think that's true for all of us. When we get more of a biochemical rush from being part of a team, we stay on the team. But when opposing the team or leaving the team gives us a bigger biochemical rush or gives us more love or adulation or applause, then we tend to leave the team, leave the community, leave the church, leave the synagogue. Back to you, Michael.
And I think another way, as you referred to that, his critics asserted that he didn't really know what he was doing in the government, and he got a lot of flack. But he's also kind of proving them right a little bit in his criticism of the Big Beautiful Bill, because the problem is that the Big Beautiful Bill can't really cut what it wants to cut, because it's, as you know, it's a tax and spend bill, so you can't put kind of legislative stuff in there rather than just taxing and spending. So everything they tried to cut, the Senate parliamentarians said, no, you can't do that. And so Elon Musk's desire to make more cuts, and then his criticism of the bill is totally misplaced, because you can't do that in this bill. And so if he wants to criticize the bill, he has to say that he's against tax cuts, basically, because you're never going to get cuts passed by Congress because Democrats will not abide by any cuts. And the Senate parliamentarian won't let them do that in this bill. And the Senate parliamentarian, perhaps she is a Democrat. I don't know. That's just a theory I could float. So she sees cuts in social welfare spending. She says, no, that's not nice. I don't like that. That's against the rules.
So if Elon Musk would receive a more intense biochemical rush and more adulation and love for supporting the bill, do you think he would support the bill?
I don't know, because to me, it seems like he would receive more of a kind of affirmation by being for the bill, given that most of the people that like him at this point, I assume, are Republicans. So being against the big, beautiful bill is kind of like a fringe perspective on the right. So I would just circle back to, I feel like he's just going with his self-interest, and back to your point about how Trump's self-interest perhaps coincides with the self-interest of just Americans, because, as you say, he's focused on his legacy. So perhaps Trump trying to make a great legacy for himself might coincide with things that Americans might want to make America a better place.
Okay, but you didn't address my point. I didn't ask you, is it possible that Elon Musk would receive more adulation for supporting the bill? I said, if he received more adulation, love, and a biochemical rush for supporting the bill, do you think he would support the bill simply on the basis of the biochemical rush and the level of love and adulation?
Okay,
or do you think that he would do you think he would choose to go against love, adulation, and biochemical rush in the service of abstract principles?
Right. Okay, I understand the question 100%, but I think that the premise when you say if he would receive more adulation, I think he would receive more adulation. So I think that's self-evident. So then you have to explain, why is he doing something that's against receiving more adulation?
Okay. All right. So how much money would you need to sell out? For example, if you
Not much.
If you were offered $1 million salary to be the chief diversity officer of an institution, and along with that you would get other perks, would you become the chief diversity officer?
I think, okay, so I'm fully available to sell out, but I think it would have to be something at least like adjacent to what I already think and believe. I'm willing to shift a little bit, but I don't think I can do a total 180. And I don't imagine you would either.
For $1 million? Well,
I'm just not a practical person, so that's my problem.
Wow. What do you think about the notion that people almost never have an ideology that goes beyond what's most adaptive to them in a particular situation? So I find that people tend to shift what they say with regard to political, cultural, religious matters depending on the situation they're in.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, most people are not working out their principles in an abstract way according to first principles and ideology. I don't think at all. But 40, I do want to talk about something and tell me if I'm switching topics too abruptly. The Michael Wolff book, we never talked about that. Can we
please.
discuss?
Yes, we can go anywhere you want to go.
Okay. So I finally finished that book, and I've read, not intentionally, but I've actually read 3 Michael Wolff books. This one, Fire and Fury, one called Too Famous, which I just kind of randomly got at the library. That's a collection of his essays from the New Yorker, I believe. And then I read this one, All or Nothing, which is about the Trump campaign, of course. And I'm such a fan of his writing, even though he's such a lefty, he's such a liberal, but I feel like he's smart enough that it doesn't dominate the book. I assume that if you read a kind of leftist book on the Trump presidency by, I don't know, like throw a name out there, just the run-of-the-mill kind of Trump-hating
right,
author.
Jeffrey Goldberg, and either
Yes,
Washington Post political reporters or columnists.
Yeah, exactly. That it would be kind of intolerable to read if you had some sympathy for Trump.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, that's true.
But I think he's smart enough that I believe, okay, first of all, if you look at the cover of the book, it's kind of like a cool picture of Trump. So that he's already breaking with the already breaking with the practices of publishing right there, that you're supposed to have kind of make Trump look like a buffoon on the cover if your audience is Democrats. And so he has kind of a cool picture of Trump. But I think that the book is front-loaded with kind of derogatory descriptions of Trump because he's assuming that the audience is people that hate Trump. So I think in the beginning of the book, he's like, here's what you want. We both hate Trump. We both look down on him. So here's some grist for that. But then as you get into the book, it's something more than that, isn't it?
Oh, yes. You can be a big fan and enjoy this book or enjoy almost everything that Michael Wolff writes. Now, he didn't write for the New Yorker. He wrote for New York magazine.
Oh, my bad. Okay, yeah.
But he is often extraordinarily fair or extraordinarily insightful or gives the feeling of being extraordinarily insightful. So often the successful guru is one who can produce the feeling that you've just received a profound insight into life without actually being profound. Michael Wolff does give you the feeling that you're receiving profound insights, even if you're on the right or on the left or in the center. You read his books, and there is a steady supply of language and constructions and sentences and paragraphs that make you feel alive and as though you're receiving an insight that you hadn't received anywhere else. And so even if you're pro-Trump, you're going to enjoy much of the work of Michael Wolff, including this latest book, All or Nothing, How Trump Recaptured America. So Michael Wolff is fundamentally contemptuous of Trump, but there's enough seeming insight and fairness and powerful anecdotes that I think many pro-Trump people will still enjoy his work.
Yeah. I mean, here's how I think of his writing. I didn't necessarily think of it as I'm going to get new insights, like Michael Wolff is going to teach me a new way to look at politics or culture. I think of it as he's just very witty, and he has witty observations, and he has a lot of sources. So you and I, we can pontificate and we can give our opinions, but like we don't really have inside info, or at least I don't. Whereas he really does, and that's one of the things that pissed people off so much about the Fire and Fury was that Trump really went hard against that book, saying fake news, and you would have thought if you watched conservative media that he literally just made up the whole book. And it's been a few years since I read it, but my impression of the book was not that he was making stuff up at all.
Well, he does. My impression of the book is that he does not feel the same constraint to fact that the authors of the two other prominent books about the 2024 election demonstrate. So when I'm thinking about one by a reporter at Axios, Alex Eisenstadt, and then another as a male-female team, I love their book on the election. So when I read their books, I sense much more of a fidelity to fact. I think that Michael Wolff gives himself more room to, say, sketch patterns that is not 100% empirically validated. And there are some very sharp distinctions in the books on the Trump presidency. So, for example, in Michael Wolff's book, he says that Donald has virtually no relationship with Melania, while in Alex Eisenstadt's book, it says that Melania plays a very important role in Donald Trump's life. So one of them is right. So I think there is a track record of some dubious assertions on the part of Michael Wolff that have got him castigated by the journalistic establishment. I think some of that is perhaps jealousy over Michael Wolff's success. I think that Michael Wolff has enough empirical attachment to reality that he's still very much worth paying attention to, but I certainly don't see the same fidelity to fact that you see in more scrupulous authors. So I take a middle position in Michael Wolff's fidelity to fact. So it would not shock me if Michael Wolff got a significant number of significant facts wrong in his book, including his assertion that Melania played virtually no role in Donald Trump's life except the occasional ceremonial role.
Well, I don't think he pushed that line that much. It's definitely there in the book, this idea that there's something going on. He implies that they might have kept separate apartments at Trump Tower. I mean, maybe they did. Like that actually sounds.
I'm sure that's true, but he did. Yeah. He did say that Melania didn't play much of a role in Trump's life. or certainly didn't play virtually any role in the campaign, while Alex Eisenstadt's book said that Trump was talking to Melania pretty much every day during the campaign and that he valued her advice. So one of them is right and one of them's wrong.
Right. Well, right. I think the other book you mentioned perhaps just had a different source of information or maybe more information on that particular topic, whereas Michael Wolff, I think, on that front at least, perhaps he was just looking at the self-evident facts that she didn't really campaign with him, and any observer can say that this is not like the closest relationship. I mean, I like Melania Trump a lot. I think she sounds cute when she talks and everything, but the one thing, the assertion where he's on a little bit more shaky ground is he talks about Boris Epstein, who is Trump's lawyer, kind of right-hand man in some ways. I don't know if he still is, but he implies throughout the book that Boris Epstein was working with the feds as part of the January 6th case, and he never really gives any evidence for that. That is, to me, that was the biggest kind of tease, like without actual substance behind it.
And also, he did it in a strategic way. He said that this was widely assumed in Trump's camp. So that way, there is a time when widespread assumptions or beliefs, I think, are legitimate to report on and describe, even if you can't find empirical evidence for them. And so I support him just raising that.
Right. But you kind of got the feeling like that was going to be fleshed out a little bit. And here I am. I finished the book yesterday and there was literally nothing. Just people thought that.
Right, but I think it was significant to raise simply that was a widespread assumption, just like it was, I think, legitimate for Skip Bayless to raise in his third book on the Dallas Cowboys, the 1995 season, their last Super Bowl victory, when he noted that there was a widespread assumption by the owner of the Cowboys, the coach of the Cowboys, so Jerry Jones, Barry Switzer, and much of the Cowboys locker room, that Troy Aikman was gay.
Right. Yeah, I wouldn't know, but anyway, he hyped it up a little bit too much for my taste, but I agree it's legitimate to talk about. And just there's so many, like I said, Michael Wolff has sources. He actually seems to know people who are in power, and that's what makes his work great, is that he's a great writer, but he's also has info that we don't have, and that's why it's fun to read. The Fire and Fury, apparently his source was Steve Bannon, and I think that's part of the reason why Steve Bannon was booted from the first administration.
Yes.
And if you read Fire and Fury, it would seem to be from the perspective, a lot of it was like the omniscient perspective of Steve Bannon, and one can only assume that's because Steve Bannon told him, what was happening. Yeah,
and one of the anecdotes in Fire and Fury was that Nikki Haley had to give Donald Trump a blowjob to get her position as a UN ambassador.
Oh my God. I don't remember that.
Oh, that's man. Yes. and one of the interesting things about the latest book is that since about 2016, Trump is post-sexual, that no one believes that he's having sex anymore.
Yeah, I wouldn't know,
but you didn't pick up on that? I thought that was significant. I mean, I think for your average man, who he has sex with is the person that he most values and will have the most influence on him. And so I think that the sex lives of powerful people are legitimate bases for inquiry. And whether or not Donald Trump is having sex and who he's having sex with, I think is an important thing.
Yeah, I mean, whatever. But who did you say made that claim?
Michael Wolff said in his latest book.
In All or Nothing?
Yeah, if that's the title of his latest book. He said that since essentially 2016, Trump has been post-sexual.
Okay. I feel like he kind of suggested that might be true, but I don't recall him saying that so definitively.
Right. He said that's the assumption of the people around Donald Trump.
Right.
So they don't seriously believe that he's banging any of the beautiful women around him. So Trump recruits many females, particularly his female attorneys, on the basis of their looks. Like there's one, I think, Alina Habba, who came to his attention because she was wearing a bikini at his Bedford resort. And so
Yeah.
he often does have quite pretty female attorneys who aren't necessarily the most competent. But even though people recognize he loves to surround himself with pretty women, there is not the assumption among people close to him that he's having sex with any of them.
Yeah, and that was actually one of the big takeaways from this book is how enthralled he is of, young, beautiful women with a certain look that he likes. And to me, I was kind of face palming reading about that, because what a stupid way to hire people. And it does bother me a lot. Like Alina Habba, yeah, but she might actually be an intelligent woman. So I don't want to say because she's beautiful, therefore don't hire her. But I do kind of feel like that about the press secretary, Caroline Leavitt, that she is smart and competent, but I don't think she would be there if she weren't, a pretty young blonde. And for example, when Stephen Miller takes the microphone at a press conference, I'm like, finally, somebody who's smart is speaking, and I might actually learn something instead of just a chick that Trump thought was hot,
Right. I somewhat disagree with you there. I think that Caroline Leavitt is very good at her job, but she's speaking to an audience with an average IQ of 100, while Stephen Miller still speaks to an audience with an average IQ of about 110. And I forgot my... Oh, this is I think the more important point is that it takes tremendous energy to accomplish anything in life, and that many of our sources for energy are not very nice. And so I think a normal person deplores the self-destructive public posting and allegiances of Donald Trump, for example, to beauty rather than competence among his lawyers. But you have to recognize that to accomplish as much as Trump does or as much as Elon does, it requires tremendous energy. And so they are tapping the energy that they get from engaging in self-destructive behavior to accomplish some formidable things. And so it's not just self-destruction that's here, that if you want Trump to be as energized and as strong as he is, you have to give him room for indulgence that for a normal person would be highly self-destructive. And so too with Elon Musk. So many of Elon Musk's public postings are ridiculous and make him look like an idiot. But without the energy that he gets from making these postings, he may not be able to accomplish the good things. And so people need a biochemical rush. People need energy. And many of our sources for energy are not the most reputable. And so in one sense, we need to take people as a whole package. Like Trump and Elon have both shown tremendous courage and tremendous energy and a tremendous accomplishment. And I think that they get much of that power, energy, and accomplishment from tapping into some less than reputable sides of their personality that for other people would be self-destructive.
Well, I think we can agree and end on that note that we all like to be around beautiful women. So you're right. I can't hate on Trump for that. If that's what keeps him going, then so be it. But thanks for having me on, Forty. Appreciate it.
Okay, bro. Take care. Good to talk to you. Okay. Let me catch my breath here.
Connection to universities. I want you to, could you tease that out a little bit?
Mm-hmm. The most important function of the university, I think, today, I guess this has always been true, though, right? It is the social locus in which the elite is produced. That's what universities do. Yeah, they teach people valuable skills. Yes, they are sites, especially since the late 19th century, for the development of technological growth and advancement, whether it's in industry or agriculture, all of these kinds of things. But socially, they produce the elite. And we very much see that today, right? It's almost impossible to be a member of the elite in America without having a college degree, particularly when you are in the elite of certain kinds of professions. You must have a college degree from an elite institution, right? Look at the Supreme Court, for example. And I think the further away you get from things that can be easily measured, like, what's the bottom line of this corporation? What's our profit rate? What's the efficiency rate? Those kinds of things. You're going to have much more weight being put on the eliteness of the school itself. So I think that's the most obvious tie between the kind of the managerial class and lots of things we've been talking about. But I think because they come ultimately from the professional class, which it's most importantly, right, is formed by the university, because that's what it means to be a professional, is to accumulate the specialized knowledge have that knowledge affirmed by a degree or some kind of certification, and then therefore exercise power in the world, supposedly at the interest of everybody, with your specialized knowledge.
So I want to talk about your American Affairs piece now. It's titled "The Puzzle of Woke Capital." And I want to start out by just asking you to define what it is you mean by woke capital.
Mm-hmm. So if you'll indulge me, I'll do the puzzle first, and then I'll kind of answer the question about what do I mean by woke capital. So the puzzle comes out of this, I think, long-standing incorrect belief. It's especially held by lots of people on the right, that capital and wokeness just don't go together, right? Capital is all about values of capitalism and values of kind of maybe a classical form of liberalism, and it's about the accumulation of property and individualism and all of these kinds of things. And it's just the antithesis of wokeness. And I think that's just false empirically. And so I'm trying to kind of understand why these things go together and seem to go together so well in America today. So by wokeness, I think it's easiest to point to some academic literature, and I don't want to sort of go too long on this and bore people too much, but there's some work by sociologists, Bradley Campbell and Jason Manning, sociologists, who came out with this argument about what they call victimhood culture. And they came out with a couple of journal articles in 2014, and then they came out with a book a few years later. And they really lay out the essence of this victimhood culture. And then I think there's also a book by there's a book by James Lindsay and Helen Pluckrose that really lays out some of the epistemological foundations, right? They kind of rooted in postmodernism and the evolution of postmodernism away from being just kind of an academic project and really wrapped up in nihilism. I think it very much was, to something that's much more practical, and it's about wielding power in the world. And this is kind of putting together a society in a way that is fundamentally divided by these different identity groups. And this is, I think, how you can kind of see how it connects to managers, right? Managers are going to be interested in this kind of ideology because it's suitable for them and promises them an important position in the world, and it promises that they can produce all kinds of goods that come out. I don't mean goods in terms of widgets, but, good things in.
Right. So the managerial class and our elites and our institutions are not producing enough of the good life for your average American to gain their support. The best book, by the way, I've read on the 2024 election so far is by Jonathan Allen and Amy Pons. It's called Fight Inside the Wildest Battle for the White House. Now, if our managerial class, if our elites were providing returns that justified their attacks on our traditional hero system, then we might be more forgiving. But for the average American, they were going backwards economically during the Biden years. So they both had to endure an onslaught against their hero system, at the same time, a degradation of their material condition. And so under Donald Trump, we have the embodiment of skepticism of institutions, skepticism of expertise, which is overwhelmingly on the left. We have skepticism of established authority, because established authority is overwhelmingly on the left. And we have a de-woking of government agencies, a dismantling of woke and left-wing ideological initiatives within federal agencies. We have this Trump administration confronting traditional media and its left-wing bias, confronting mainstream academia and their left-wing bias, and attempts to undermine the authority of the mainstream media and the academy and the professions to take back the definition of reality that more conforms with the porous understanding of the self. So the porous versus the buffered identity. So the buffered identity is that the individual on his own can decide what is right and wrong and plot a strategic path through life. This is the Enlightenment perspective, the left-wing perspective, the classically liberal perspective, that the individual is the center of all things. The traditional perspective is it's not the individual, it's the extended family, the tribe, the community who is the center of all things. And that we get our understanding of right and wrong and our hero system from the tribe, from the community. And it's not just something that we can conjure with the force of our own thinking. So there is much more of a faith on the power of the individual's disembodied thinking within their buffered identity to decide what is right and wrong, what is strategic on the left compared to the right. And so as a traditionalist, I believe in a porous identity where what's going on around me is constantly affecting me, and I recognize that my hero system comes from outside of me, and the most productive use of my cognitive power is aligning my behavior with that of the hero system of the people who are most important to me. Now, Trump and conservatives in the current administration, right, they've been assertive and they are having some victories, but they face formidable opposition from NGOs, progressive media, academics, many state and local governments that want to champion left-wing causes. We have many legal challenges where the left has had its share of victories. We have the rising up of grassroots left-wing activism, such as the No Kings protest, and we have many artists and cultural producers creating works of art that challenge conservative narratives. So Trump is not merely a participant. He is the central figure and a driving force behind the culture wars. I'm reading here from AI Analysis. He is the leader of the anti-woke movement. He is trying to set our dominant narrative. He is implementing policies against woke culture. And so far, during the first 6 months of 2025, the forces aligned with Donald Trump have been on the offensive. They have achieved significant traction in pushing their desired narratives and policies in the wars over reality, particularly concerning historical interpretation, sexual and gender identity, and the role of the government and cultural institutions. But the opposition is resisting fiercely. They are mounting often very effective legal challenges. They are organizing at the grassroots. They are promoting their counter-narratives in alternative spaces. So the fight very much is joined
in the world. So I think that's the best way and the kind of shortest way to sum up wokeness. If you want to call it social justice ideology, I think that's a good way of thinking of it too.
Mm-hmm. And so you pose several theories why woke capital emerged and why it's taken hold in corporations. And you say that each might have its merits, but it ultimately fails. And I want to draw out maybe two of them. One of them is the idea that advocating for social justice, especially regarding issues of identity, can allow corporations to mask the various things that they do that can maintain their power, or this is basically probably a more classic Marxist argument that you would see maybe in a place like Compact magazine, where the idea is that the excessive focus on wokeness or on DEI allows corporations to basically get away with things that they are not, that are contrary to the ideals, the purported ideals of social justice. So what do you make of this argument?
Mm-hmm. So I give a label to this. I call it the diversionary theory of woke capital. That is exactly as you said, John. I'm a capitalist. From kind of a left perspective, I'm engaging in all kinds of bad things. And so I go off and I kind of tip my hat to woke nostrums, and this supposedly is going to fool all these stupid left-wingers, and they're going to love me. Because one of the examples that I use in the article is, I've forgotten the exact name of the investment fund, but the ones in New York City who put up the Fearless Girl statue a couple of years back. And so why did they do that? Well, some people said, well, it's because they had this lawsuit that the Department of Labor brought against them for unfair labor practices, especially regarding women. So here's what they can do. They can come out and they can pretend to be super woke and very feminist, and it's going to throw up dust in the eyes of left-wingers who apparently by this theory are amazingly stupid and can't figure.
So I asked Grok, Gemini, and ChatGPT, my 3 AI subscriptions. Here was my question, right? Given that I hold by a traditional understanding of reality, traditional heterosexual understanding of marriage, why would I not hate elites, universities, and all of the professions who are at war with me? So ChatGPT says, well, here are the reasons why your hatred feels justified, right? The dominant elite mock your beliefs, and they make them professionally disqualifying. They define you as the problem. You are bigoted, uneducated, harmful, anti-science, and anti-democracy. They use their power and their positions in law, medicine, education, and the media to enforce norms that violate your conscience. They show no reciprocity. They demand tolerance from you while offering none to you. They threaten your family's future, your schooling, careers, social integration, and even faith formation. So it feels less like a pluralistic disagreement and more like a cultural purge, right? You feel, you experience a slow erasure of people like you from public life. Then, point number 2, ChatGPT lists why hatred may be self-destructive. So, intense hatred is probably self-destructive. A mild version of hatred, right, is probably adaptive. Right? Hatred clouds strategy. It concedes moral ground. It destroys community. It isolates you. And the people that you're tempted to hate are not monolithic villains, right? They may be confused. They may be fearful. They may be ideologically captured, but they're not evil. Right? What's the strategic alternative to hatred? Clarity without contempt. You do not need to retreat, but instead of hatred, maybe have moral clarity without rage. Maybe have defiance without dehumanizing your enemies. Have resistance without mimicry. Do not become what you are fighting. So perhaps this is how cultural renewal begins, not with scorched earth, but with institutions of your own, synagogues, churches, schools, businesses, publications, legal networks, capable of forming people and families in truth and beauty. Maybe a philosophical frame. You're not losing because you're wrong. Right, one of the most demoralizing lies the modern system tells is the side with power must be the side of progress. But that's not true. Right, Galileo was crushed by the powers of his day. Solzhenitsyn was imprisoned and exiled. The early Christian church was a fringe persecuted sect. Right, Jews in Nazi Germany didn't fare too well. In all these cases, truth did not win by being popular, it won by being real. If you believe in objective reality rooted in nature, tradition, Torah, and reason, then your calling is not to be affirmed by the powers that be in the world. Your calling is to be faithful in the face of rejection. Final thought. They fear you too. Much of the elite class is terrified of people like you. They fear that your worldview, if allowed to reassert itself, would unravel their entire symbolic order. That's why they overreact with censorship, re-education, social pressure. They know that your worldview has coherence, history, moral power, and fertility, literally and spiritually. You are not powerless. You are part of a counterculture with roots. If you stay grounded, refuse hatred, and build for the long term, you might outlast the storm. So I wrote back, I'm an Orthodox Jew. How can I push back? 1, fortify the walls, Torah, halacha, and communal institutions. First law of spiritual survival. If the outside world denies your reality, then double down on forming and living within your own. Halakha, Jewish law, is your constitution, not only in the legal sense, but existentially. It defines what a human is, what marriage is, what family is, what the days and seasons mean. Strengthen the mikveh, the Beit Midrash, the Shabbat table. These are not luxuries. These are bunkers and launch pads. Education is defense and offense. Invest in Jewish schools that teach not just technical observance, but faith, worldview, and the moral architecture of Torah. Your children must know what the outside world says and why it is wrong. So the pushback begins by refusing to outsource formation. 2, protect the family at all cost. Family is the front line. Every ideology that seeks to redefine reality must capture the child. That's why you're seeing such aggression from schools, media, and the state. Orthodox Judaism has a powerful head start. Orthodox Jews have family cohesion, high birth rate, strong parental authority. Guard it fiercely. Teach children that the pressure to conform will be enormous, but the reward for standing in truth is eternal. You don't raise children for comfort. You raise them to be heirs to a covenant order than America. 3, preserve language, categories, and meaning. To name is to rule. The culture war is largely about who gets to define reality and define words. You must resist linguistic colonization. Do not adopt the terms and the language of the secular left, such as assigned at birth, gender-affirming care, even to argue against them. Language shapes consciousness. Teach the Hebrew and the halakhic roots of identity. Torah provides its own moral vocabulary. Create literature, media, and commentary that defends the Torah worldview using both tradition and philosophical rigor. Don't let Goyish thought leaders tell your story. Number 4, stand in dignified opposition without hatred. There is power in being unapologetically different, not belligerent, not shrill, but firm. You're not a victim. You are part of Am Yisrael, who stood at Sinai when the rest of the world slept. Don't ask to be liked. Ask to be faithful. Be willing to say no to jobs, schools, platforms, and professions that demand betrayal of Torah truth. Support Jews who are fired, mocked, or marginalized for standing by Torah truth and Jewish law in hostile environments. When you refuse to bow, you don't just resist, you reveal the emptiness of the idol. And you encourage each other. Number 5, build parallel institutions. You can't just play defense, right? Build parallel institutions. Build your own power centers. Train Orthodox attorneys to defend religious liberty, conscience rights, and parental authority. Elevate Orthodox voices in journalism, documentary, and social commentary. Culture is shaped by storytellers. Medicine, psychology, and social work. Develop Torah-faithful professionals who serve the community without compromising halakha and without normalizing deviance. This takes time, and this takes investment, but you already know how to build institutions because you've done it for centuries. 6, forge tactical alliances without diluting Torah. Many Christians and many Muslims face similar pressures. Tactical alliances can be made on issues like school choice, parental rights, religious exemptions, medical conscience, defending the male-female sexual binary. Don't let politics override halakhic boundaries. You are not called to blend. You are called to stand. 7, remember this is exile, but it is not defeat. You're not in charge of the world, but you're not powerless. Right? Every exile has its challenges. In our time, it is confusion. It is the denial of human reality, sex, limits, and truth. But we have a blueprint. It is Torah, not just to survive, but to outlast. Torah is not in the heavens. It is very close to you. It is in your mouth and in your heart so that you may do it. So that was some words. Those were some words of inspiration from ChatGPT.
Figure out what capital's doing. And so therefore it builds trust, it builds support and legitimacy for them. I mean, I don't think it's absolutely wrong. I think there's teeny bits of evidence for it, like the example of the Fearless Girl statute that I just mentioned. But I don't think there's enough evidence. I think it presumes that people are very easily fooled by these kinds of actions. And so not to say that there is no kind of public image or public relations goal here, but that can't tell us very much, especially when there's all kinds of examples that we can find of corporations that encourage and unleash backlash on themselves, right? They go off and they do these woke social justice activities, and the vast majority of people, including their own consumers, hate them for it.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. So the other I think explanation that I'd love to hear your thoughts on is this explanation from Richard Hanania, the idea that wokeness is just civil rights law. Can you give a little bit of a summary of that explanation, because it's an interesting argument, and I understand why a lot of people gravitate towards it, and then maybe some thoughts on why you ultimately disagree.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
ChatGPT did a phenomenal job outlining how Orthodox Jews can't resist the left-wing dominance of our institutions. I'm quite impressed. Right, Gemini is what it had to say. While feelings of alienation and frustration are understandable, here are reasons why outright hate might not be the most constructive or even authentically Jewish response. There's a Jewish tradition of engagement with the world, right? And this isn't about capitulation. It is about discerning what is valuable and what needs to be filtered out. Judaism and Torah, not just for the synagogue, they encompass all of life, including engagement with intellectual pursuits, professions, and society. Jewish tradition teaches that all human beings are created in the image of God. So we can see the inherent dignity and potential in every person, even those with whom we profoundly disagree. So this perspective calls for dialogue and respectful engagement, even in disagreement, rather than pure animosity. We can recognize the complexity of individuals. Even within elite institutions, there are individuals who hold diverse views, including those who may be sympathetic to traditional values and those who value intellectual honesty and open debate. Painting everyone in an elite institution with a broad brush of enemy obscures potential allies and opportunities for nuanced engagement. Hate isn't effective. It leads to alienation and isolation. It's self-destructive. It hardens positions on both sides. Hate reinforces harmful stereotypes, and it erodes the moral high ground. It leads to actions and rhetoric that compromises one's own moral integrity. Maintaining a stance of dignity, principle, and respect in disagreement is more powerful. You can seek common ground. Matters of civic order and pluralism, you have intense cultural battles, but most people, even those who disagree on some fundamental social issues, still desire a functioning society, peace, and order. You can find areas of common interest where cooperation is possible despite deep ideological divides. Religious freedom is a shared interest with many different groups. And you can push back, right, through internal strength and education, robust Jewish education, building the community, developing internal thought leaders. You can have strategic engagement with professions and institutions. You can fight from within, or you can create alternative create alternative institutions. Right? There's a place for active advocacy and coalition building. You can have public education and media engagement. You can articulate your reality. You don't have to just react to the other side. You can present a positive vision of traditional values, family life, community, and the benefits of religiously grounded life. You can bypass traditional gatekeepers to leverage new media platforms such as podcasts, social media, and independent journalism to reach broader audiences directly, bypassing potentially hostile mainstream news media. You can focus on stories, not just arguments. Human stories of how traditional values bring meaning, resilience, and happiness can be far more persuasive than abstract arguments. Right? You can exercise prudential judgment. Not all aspects of elite culture are equally hostile or dangerous. You can discern where engagement is productive and where insulation is necessary. You can engage in certain scientific fields and instead stay away from other more highly politicized social sciences. You can redraw the lines. The goal isn't necessarily to win the culture war by imposing your reality on everyone, but to ensure that your reality can continue to exist, thrive, and contribute within a pluralistic society. You can advocate for boundaries, protections, and spaces where traditional values can be lived out with undue coercion or penalty. And that was Gemini. And it also notes that hatred clouds judgment. Not all elite are enemies. Institutions are battlegrounds. Universities and professions are not lost causes. You can seize the moral high ground. You can be practical. Hatred isolates potential allies. Engagement preserves your influence and attracts moderates wary of elite excess. You can defend biological reality. You can create legal advocacy groups. You can educate the community. You can form alliances. You can engage with Donald Trump's policies. So in 2025, we had an Orthodox Jewish school in New York that, for example, that might sue over some state mandate requiring a trans-inclusive curricula. Right, a lot of great ideas here from AI. Right, how can conservatives reduce the power of the NGO industrial complex, which is overwhelmingly on the left, reduce the power of universities, and reduce the power of the left-wing professions?
I think Hanania is a really good example of that. And I think Christopher Caldwell, right? He had a book that came out a few years ago that I think basically made this similar argument, at least. I think those are the right places to go to and see exemplars of them. Again, I think it's not wrong per se, but I think it's vastly insufficient because I think it's clear that corporations go well above and beyond what they are required to do by law. You can see this in the history of the evolution of diversity and before that affirmative action offices. In fact, the very definition of what discrimination is and how you would even identify it was not created by law. It was created by corporations who had the law, right? They had the 1964 Civil Rights Act, but nobody really knew what all these words meant. And so therefore, corporations are facilitating the evolution of the law. They're trying to define the law in certain kinds of ways that are beneficial to them, both materially, but also in terms of the ideology that they want to advance. I think, at least to me, there's some pretty convincing arguments that I've read that the kinds of practices, the kinds of diversity practices that corporations do today are exaggerating what the law requires. They go.
All right, back to answers on how to push back that I gleaned from AI. So you can scrutinize the funding and the transparency of left-wing NGOs. Right? You can also tax them differently. You can limit government contracts and subsidies for left-wing NGOs. You can promote market-based solutions and private philanthropy. And you can challenge the non-profit status of left-wing NGOs that are violating the terms for non-profit status for political gain. You can promote intellectual diversity and free speech universities. You can reform curricula. You can push for financial accountability and transparency. You can stop subsidizing left-wing universities. You can create alternative universities. And you can encourage and develop a conservative academic pipeline. You can challenge the left-wing tilt of professional associations. You can form alternative associations. You can challenge existing leadership. You can advocate for professional neutrality on political issues. You can promote merit and de-emphasize identity politics. You can reform the left-wing tilt to licensing and certification. We don't need nearly as much licensing and credentialing as we currently employ. We can encourage professional neutrality in public service. We can support whistleblowers and dissenters. You can weaponize power when you have power. You can change incentive structures. You can reform tax laws. You can examine funding. You can rebuild cultural capital, right? Long-term influence flows from prestige and narrative control. You can develop and support storytellers who represent a traditional understanding of reality. You can fund filmmakers, podcasters, writers, and influencers. You can take more control of the narrative. You can strengthen churches, synagogues, and civic associations that form the moral and social backbone of non-left communities. You can honor trades, family, entrepreneurship. You can celebrate paths of life outside elite credentials. So it sure seems from my experience of modern Orthodox Judaism that the modern Orthodox are particularly dominated by professionals, and they are overwhelmingly in left-wing professions. All professions are left-wing, from law to medicine to psychology. You can win minds and emotions and imagination. You can educate your own. Do not send your children to institutions that hate your values. You can homeschool. You can send them to religious schools. You can develop more mentorship and apprenticeships. You can revive mentorship and guild-style learning. Every child diverted from an elite left-wing pipeline is one less recruit for the system. You can litigate and legislate ruthlessly, right? The left has litigated and legislated ruthlessly. Conservatives must do the same, file lawsuits, challenge unconstitutional DEI programs, compelled speech and viewpoint discrimination. You can legislate defensively, pass laws that restrict politicization of accreditation, grant distribution, and licensure. You can challenge and create legal precedents that restrain ideological overreach. You build coalitions of the sane. Use common ground. Divide the left against itself by supporting those who reject woke orthodoxy. This is not a short-term political fight. It's a generational cultural war. You don't need to control everything. Just build strong, sane, beautiful alternatives, even superior alternatives, and let reality do the rest. You can leverage economic and political pressure. You can defund left-wing institutions. You can encourage conservatives and businesses to withdraw support from the pro-diversity, pro-gay crowd and redirect their funds elsewhere. You can exercise legislative oversight. You can highlight the failures of the left. You can reform from within. You can infiltrate and influence. You can engage in governance. You can challenge discrimination, protect free speech, avoid overreach. Heavy-handed tactics like defunding entire sectors can backfire by alienating moderates, re-energizing opponents. Focus on targeted, principled reforms. Exercise long-term commitment. Shifting entrenched institutions take decades. You must invest in sustained efforts rather than expecting immediate wins. And frame your efforts as pro-freedom, pro-diversity of thought, and pro-merit to avoid being labeled as anti-intellectual or as authoritarian or fascist.
Way too far. There's this very exaggerated fear of lawsuits. Now, I think people like Hanania and Caldwell would say, no, I think there is genuine fear of lawsuits, and that's why they do what they do. But I think I've read pieces by human resources professionals who have claimed that most corporations are doing too much, going too far, if it's only a matter of compliance. They go beyond, in part because they want to, but I think it's probably better to think of it in more specific ways. There's lots of people who are hired on to do these jobs in corporations, in universities, right? The expansion, especially in the university, of bureaucratic staff over the last generation or so means that now you have full-time employees whose job, 40 hours a week, is to promote diversity. And so it's coming from inside the firm, I think.
If your religious community, if your church, if your synagogue can give people more love, more meaningful excitement, more meaning, more of a biochemical rush from engaging and participating and sacrificing for the community than secular alternatives, then your religious community will likely enjoy more success. Next question that I posed to AI: why do so many people on the right fear exercising power? Why are they afraid of the right taking over institutions? Why do they fear the right using government power to remake institutions and society? Right? These right-wingers who fear exercising governmental power remind me of Jews opposed to Zionism. So Zionism is another word for Jewish nationalism. So the fear among many conservatives about exercising power and actively reshaping institutions and society from the top down comes from a mixture of ideological principles, historical caution, and practical concerns. So there's an ideological commitment by parts of the right to limited government, to restraint. Right, many anti-Zionist Jews reject nationalism as contrary to their values. Conservatives often see power as inherently corrupting, clashing with their ideal of individual liberty and decentralized order. Conservatives remember backlash, where aggressive power moves led to cultural political blowback. Right, the moral majority's influence in the 1990s galvanized left-wing resistance. Many on the religious right are influenced by Christian teachings emphasizing humility, turning the other cheek, and trusting divine providence over human ambition. Conservatives know that institutions such as universities, media, and NGOs are dominated by left-leaning elites who can weaponize their influence to paint right-wing power grabs as fascistic or anti-democratic and thus scare off moderates. There are practical and strategic concerns. There's institutional inertia. There's fear of overreach, lack of confidence. There are moral and identity-based hesitations, self-perception as underdogs, guilt or ambivalence, distrust of their own side. Now, this may be changing, right? We see Ron DeSantis and Donald Trump exercising governmental power in a way that I don't recall the right doing for a long time.
Much more so, although not wholly, than coming from outside of it.
Yeah, I'm very familiar with that expansion within universities, and it struck me recently when somebody asked me, how many diversity officers could a university cut before they run into compliance issues? And I've really never thought about that, because the existence of diversity officers is, at least from what I have seen in university policy, it's typically not couched in terms of compliance, and what they do. Tends to be just various versions of promoting kind of race-conscious policies and extension of affirmative action, much more than it's, trying to avoid lawsuits. I think there are probably examples of that happening, but at least from what I've seen, these major DEI policies that come up in universities tend not to have much to do with trying to avoid lawsuits, even though that might be at least the stated reason in some corporations.
It's interesting, right? You see a lot of DEI officers complaining that the higher ups, the kind of the executive management level, don't take them seriously. And I think that's a really interesting insight into the way this stuff kind of works, because it may be that the people at the top, right, the CEOs, are just going through the motions. Although I think a lot of CEOs certainly seem to believe it. I guess that's kind of a judgment call. But when you get closer to the heart of these projects, for example, in the university, the DEI bureaucracy, or in human resources departments of big corporations, you see the true believers, and that's why they exist. They were hired to do this work all day, every day. And so it may be that lots of these offices have run away from the original sources of power that created them in the first place. And so they've kind of grown into be these Frankenstein monsters that can't be controlled anymore. But at least when it comes to higher education, which is obviously a field I know a lot better than industry in America, I don't see too many presidents of colleges and universities having much of any interest in reining in their DEI bureaucracy. They want more, and they want to empower those people.
Yeah, and it's also interesting that a lot of DEI initiatives are really created by faculty on DEI committees rather than DEI officers. There are some places, like maybe Ohio State, where there are 132 DEI officers, and they seem to be doing a lot. But there are other places like, Texas Tech University. We just wrote a piece about how their Department of Biological Sciences started really heavily weighing diversity statements, and we got a hold of how they evaluated job candidates for their demonstrated commitment to DEI. And that, to my knowledge, was not conducted by diversity officers at all. It was all done within academic departments. So it seems like something else besides just a desire for compliance is what drove that kind of policy, and what drives a lot of people in these sort of
The host there has quite a monotone voice. He would benefit from voice lessons. I wonder if I've improved from my formerly Kermit the Frog voice and monotone. I'd like to think that My voice lessons and my ongoing voice exercises has produced a more lyrical and musical and varied quality to my speaking. I certainly no longer feel the voice strain that I used to feel during live streams, as I've learned to resonate from the top of the back of my throat. So I moved the resonance point up to the nya, 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 where you resonate when you do that nya, 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 nya. That's where I try to speak from. And it requires more effort, and it requires more upward direction through my torso. But then once you apply that effort, you can fairly strongly push out and project your voice. I always had trouble projecting my voice, even with all my years of learning the Alexander technique, until I started getting voice lessons circa 2018, 2019. So I remember chatting with Nathan Kofness about something I noticed in reality, and that is individuals and groups are constantly trying to remake reality in their own interest. And conservatives were often appalled by government-imposed COVID restrictions and the Great Reset, about how the forces of the left and the forces of the managerial elite were going to use COVID restrictions as an opportunity to remake society in a left-wing direction, how heinous that was. And I thought that was vastly overstated, because it struck me that in every crisis and in every day, everybody is constantly trying to remake the world around them in a way that is most attuned to their own interests. And Nathan Kofness did a PhD in the philosophy of biology. And I asked him, is there a biological term for this aspect of reality? And he said, yeah, it's called niche construction. So niche construction recognizes that all forms of life are constantly trying to reconstruct the niche in which they live to make it better suited to them. And so I asked AI, any living organism that resists niche construction is surely less likely to have offspring who win in the evolutionary struggle for survival. Right? So failing to actively shape your community and the institutions and societies around you, right, is going to weaken your group's power, strength, ability to reproduce, your influence, and your survival. Right? Niche construction. That is a process by which organisms modify their environment to affect their evolutionary fitness. So you have beavers building dams, you have humans creating agricultural systems. Organisms that fail to adapt and to shape their niche likely face reduced survival odds, especially in competitive and changing environments. Right? Resistance to niche construction, whether due to passivity, fear, or principle, is likely to lead to decline in the survivability and the strength of your organism or group, as you are outcompeted by others who actively shape the environment to their advantage. So conservatives who hesitate to exercise power to reshape left-wing institutions seem to be resisting niche construction. Right? Our cultural and institutional landscape, academia, media, NGOs, professions, the law, this is the environment in which we must compete. Progressives have spent decades constructing this niche to favor their values. They have embedded DEI frameworks in schools and businesses. They have secured NGO funding, and they have shaped professional norms in their favor. So conservatives who avoid aggressively fighting this by building their own institutions, by trying to influence policy, and by challenging existing power structures risk being marginalized in a niche increasingly hostile to their values. So just as an organism or an orgasm that does not adapt to its environment, right, just as a species that fails to exploit new resources may lose out to competitors, conservatives who fear exercising power may cede ground to progressives. Just occurred to me, though, if conservatives instead devote their energy to creating and building strong families, that would be an incredibly powerful form of resistance. So to avoid the risks of resisting niche construction, conservatives should build alternative niches. They should shape the existing niche that they live in. They should adapt to the current niche, and they should overcome their fear of exercising power. The niche construction analogy is powerful, but it has its limits. Political groups have conscious ideologies. They have human agency in ways that non-human biological organisms may not. Power is exceedingly complex, and there are the risks of overreach.
highly credentialed professional positions.
Yeah, it's part of the class culture, I think, to believe in these things and therefore to want to promote the policies that are supposedly going to realize the goals and virtues that the class believes in. There are, I think, just too many cases, especially in academia, of, let me take a step back. Academics are a notably left-wing profession, culturally especially. And so therefore, when you're looking at, the possibility of mandating a DEI statement for all of your job candidates, what most people do is they don't sit back and think to themselves, what's the ideal way to interview or to ask for materials from potential job candidates? What they do is they say, what should I do? What are the right kinds of practices? What are the best practices? Yeah. And so anybody who's able to set best practices, which tends to be the elites, right? If Harvard and Yale are doing it, it must be good. And so these things can then trickle down, and sooner or later, everybody's doing this kind of stuff because it's just come to be accepted that this is the right way to behave. These are the right values to hold, and therefore this is the right way to interview job candidates, for example.
Yeah, that's definitely true. It's very amusing to count the number of universities that use this rubric for evaluating diversity statements that came from UC Berkeley. So UC Berkeley, prestigious public university, possibly the most prestigious public university out there. They released this rubric and began using diversity statements much more intensely in around 2017. And it is certainly the case that if a university uses some sort of guidelines for assessing diversity statements, they're using an adapted version of UC Berkeley's. That process of looking out for what you ought to do and imitating best practices certainly seems to be a driving force in these kind of higher ed DEI policies.
And I think, John, that this is the heart of what it means to be a professional. We are defined by peer review. It doesn't really matter what the masses out there think of us. What matters is what we think of ourselves. And so therefore, academics are highly open to social pressures and not so much pressure as in, I'm going to force you to do something. It is that I'm going to show you what the right way to behave and think is. And if we are all mostly concerned with what our peers think, and our peers are the ones that define best practices and the right ways of thinking, then we're about the last people to be the independent thinkers who are charting new pathways. We're going to be highly socially conformist. And I think that's exactly what you see.
And you say this is how professionals think. It seems that these sort of social or professional class categories play a big role in your account of untangling that puzzle of woke capital. So how would you say you kind of solve the puzzle in your article, and how do you think about solving this puzzle whereby woke capital is not sort of a contradiction, but actually something that makes complete sense given the people who hold power in elite circles?
So the unraveling, if you will, or the solving of the puzzle is by breaking the groups of people inside corporate America that have power into their constituent parts. And I think the simplest way, and I think it's still an effective and accurate way of doing so, is to separate the managers from the professionals, right? You see wokeness from corporations in certain kinds of fields. You don't see it so much in others. You see it in fields where there's lots of professionals, where there's a lot of call for creativity. You don't see it from, railroad companies and oil companies and things like that. You see it in entertainment. You see it in sports, right? You see it in these kinds of fields. And so what I think is happening is that wokeness is a concession, if you will. Corporate wokeness is a concession to the professional class employees of the firm. To the extent that the professional class employees have power, they're going to try to pressure their corporation to be woke, to carry.
So I asked AI to write some jokes for me, and I fed it my online autobiography. I fed it various articles that have been written about me. I encouraged the AI to Google me and then to write me some jokes that are authentic and tailored to me and to my life experience as a 59-year-old bachelor from Australia who converted to Orthodox Judaism. So I think these jokes are okay. I'm 59, single, and still looking for my bashert. That means match. My rabbi says, Luke, you'll find her when you stop blogging about your old porn days. I said, Rabbi, that's my only pickup line. It's okay. Right? It works because it's self-deprecating and poignant. It pokes fun at my bachelorhood. Right, next joke. I converted to Judaism to make the world better, but my synagogue kicked me out when they found my old website. I guess my mitzvah of gossip didn't count. Right? This is paradoxical. It highlights the clash between your religious sincerity and your controversial past. Next joke. Back in high school, I was so awkward I got strangled for my newspaper articles. Now I'm an Orthodox Jew and I'm still dodging chokeholds just from my own conscience. Okay, that's my favorite one so far. I used to run marathons to escape my problems. Now I daven twice a day to face them. Turns out praying's harder than hitting the wall at mile 18. My father preached salvation by faith alone, but I converted to Judaism for the rules. Now I keep kosher. I observe the Sabbath, but I still cannot figure out how to kosher my old porn tapes. In the porn industry, I was the Matt Drudge of gossip. Now I'm an Orthodox blogger. My biggest scoop is, who brought the best kugel to shore? I spent my 20s chasing centerfolds, my 30s chasing Torah. At age 59, I'm just chasing a good seat at the synagogue, preferably near the exit. As a kid, I threw manure at people to get attention. Now I blog about culture. Let's just say that my aim has improved, but the smell still lingers. I told my therapist I want to live on a kibbutz to cleanse my soul. She said, Luke, you'd probably start a blog about the cows. I said, only if they're kosher. That doesn't work for me. My high school nickname was Squeakin' Deacon for my voice. Now I vlog about Judaism, and I'm still squeaking, just with more Torah and less teen angst. Right. Now, the next jokes are from ChatGPT. As a convert to Orthodox Judaism, I try to blend in, which is hard when you're the only guy in shul who tucks in his seat, right, these are the fringes, but leaves his shirt out. I call it a spiritual mullet. Halacha in the front, party in the back. Okay, I like that one. My Jewish dating profile is just one sentence. Converted, observant, emotionally overexposed, formerly blogged porn, but in a halakhically permissible way. I belong to more religions than most people have exes. Adventist, evangelical, atheism, Orthodox Judaism. I didn't leave Christianity because it failed me. I just read the fine print. When I tell people I'm a convert to Judaism, they say, wow, that's such a deep commitment. And I say, well, technically, I was already committed just to therapy. My blog used to cover the porn industry. Now I write about Orthodox rabbis. Honestly, the scandals are the same, just with fewer silicone implants and more footnotes. You know, you've made a weird career transition when you go from interviewing porn stars to asking rabbis how to kosher a kitchen. Both require serious oral tradition. Should be kasha, a kitchen. At 59, I'm still single. My dating strategy now is just to talk about my feelings until they ghost me for spiritual reasons. I once fell in love with a woman because she correctly pronounced Rambam, not Rambam. Then I ruined it by telling her I used to cover the AVN Awards. As a convert, I do everything extra. I don't just bench after meals. I give a TED Talk. I once washed my hands so long before bread. My date thought I had OCD. Said, no, I just fear Hashem and bacteria. My father was disfellowshipped from the Seventh-day Adventist Church for heresy. Meanwhile, I'm trying to get into a community by out-halakhicking born Jews. Family motto is always be arguing with someone's rabbi. So I guess the first set of jokes were from Grok, and now the final set of jokes comes from Gemini. You know you're a former Seventh-day Adventist converting to Orthodox Judaism when your biggest childhood rebellion was stealing candy and reading theology for punishment. Now I do both on purpose, and it's called Shabbat preparation. Becoming Orthodox at age 59 means I'm basically a Jewish prodigy. only instead of memorizing Gemara, that means the Talmud, I'm just trying to remember where I put my tefillin this morning. My Rebbe says I have a crazy idea of Judaism as a world mission. I just tell him it's the only one left after I quit trying to make the Dallas Cowboys win. They say I'm socially awkward. I prefer intellectually dominant in group settings. My second grade teacher wrote, Luke needs to be more tolerant of the slower thinker. I suppose that's why my closest friends are usually historical figures in books. They never interrupt. That's a good one. I think this is my favorite one. As a bachelor convert, dating is interesting. When I tell women I sleep on the floor, on a sheet, and under blankets, but no sleeping bag, it's usually the second date. First date is usually just them trying to figure out if I still have a hot plate. I've been called obnoxious, arrogant, and once the rapist in my yearbook. I apologized to one of them years later. It's tough being a self-proclaimed anti-porn moral crusader who also profits from adult industry advertising. Just proves I'm equally confusing to everyone, everywhere. And those are all the jokes that my 3 AI subscriptions could generate.
Carry forth social justice kinds of policies, especially things that I think managers are probably more than happy to do, which is issue important statements about how they feel about whatever happens to be going on in the world at the time, in exactly the same way that college presidents do. I think there's not a lot of difference between being a college president and being a CEO of a company in this way. And so what I think that's where the explanation comes from, is that firms that have a lot of professional class employees who have a lot of power force their corporations to be woke, and therefore kind of set the cultural tone for the whole organization. But the way, therefore, of combating woke capital is the undermining of the power of the professionals inside those firms. And I think that's what you've begun to see just over the last 6, maybe 12 months, right? The tech industry, I think, is a great example of this. Expanded tremendously in COVID, right? Everybody's online, everybody's doing Zoom. Tech companies beef up and hire a whole bunch of people. And we see these kind of extreme moments of wokeness from tech companies. And over the last 6 to 12 months, tech has been shedding lots of workers. And I think tech has become markedly less, at least openly less woke because of that. Plus, you're seeing some political pushback, right? Everything that's going on in Florida with Ron DeSantis and his administration is, I think, also an instance that the political power of the state.
So this conversation took place 2 years ago.
Matters too. And so if the right can capture state governments, for example, they can use that power wholly legitimately, wholly through the law and democratic procedures to rein this stuff in.
Yeah, and I want to get to some maybe practical, almost policy answers like you're alluding to in a minute. I'll remind the audience that in a few minutes we'll get to audience questions if you have any. So feel free to put them in the chat, and I'll ask them to Professor Paul. But I want to ask you to talk a little bit more about the connection then between the university and this kind of pressure from professionals on corporations.
So how do you write a joke with AI?
My name is Sarah Rose Siskin, and I'm a comedy writer. So I'm writing jokes for a client today. He's a software engineer, and he's roasting his coworkers at an event. Here's how people think I use ChatGPT.
Write a joke about coders.
Why do coders prefer dark mode? Because the light attracts bugs.
Terrible. Here's how I actually write jokes with ChatGPT. As a comedy writer, I know that parodies and roasts are all about archetypes. So I know usually in an office, there's somebody who's older. So I'm going to start there.
What are old programmer stereotypes?
Back in my day stories. That's a good place to start. What are the kinds of stories they might say? Okay, startup stories and nostalgia. That sort of inspires me to think about when an older coworker talks about meeting a famous celebrity. So, who are some famous coding celebrities? Okay, I'm going to go with Steve Wozniak because he's a little obscure to the lay public, but very well known to the coding community, and also not the obvious choice like Steve Jobs. Okay, perfect. Now I just need to figure out what year would have been good to meet him. Okay, 1976. That's a little too early. We want this story to be lamer. So I'm going to go with 1998. Reading this, it could be lamer still. So let's have it be that the coworker almost met Steve Wozniak in 1998. Putting it together, we get big thanks to our veteran coder for regularly telling us about that time he almost met Steve Wozniak in 1998. And that's how I write a joke with ChatGPT.
Right. So AI is like an instrument, and you need skill and awareness. and dexterity to ably use this instrument, just like not everybody plays the violin with the same amount of skill. So that's an excellent introduction there on how to write a joke with ChatGPT.
That you seem to say is integral to the existence of woke capital. What a lot of accounts of where we are today find their origin in point back to universities. University English departments started postmodernism, or universities embraced Marxism, or there are sophisticated and crude versions of this. But I'm kind of curious.
So, have you ever wondered why Israel is so supportive of the Kurds? Is it just out of kindness and altruism and empathy? Or are there national interests at stake? This is Professor John Mearsheimer speaking a few days ago to Glenn Greenwald.
Slightly different view of this than you do. And I believe that if you go back to the period after Israel was created, the Israelis have had a deep-seated interest in basically wrecking all of their Arab neighbors. What's happening now to Syria, or what's happened to Syria over the past year and a half, is what the Israelis would like to do to Iran. They want to fracture their neighbors, break them apart if possible. When the Israelis talk about regime change in Iran, they're talking about more than regime change. They want to break Iran into constituent parts. The Israelis, for example, have had a deep-seated interest in creating a Kurdish state. And I've always wondered why the Israelis were interested in creating a Kurdish state and paying so much attention to Kurdish nationalism. It's because if you created a Kurdish state, you would break apart Iraq, Iran, Syria, and even Turkey. And this has long been their goal. It's a divide and conquer policy. So I think it's just important to understand that they do want to be the most powerful state in the region, as you were alluding.
Right. This is pretty much identical to England's strategy vis-a-vis Europe. So there's nothing here about Israelis being uniquely evil or their strategy being uniquely perfidious. It's just common sense.
But it's more than that. They believe that the way to do that is to be joined at the hip with the United States, number one. Number two, be the only state in the region that has nuclear weapons. Number three, be by far the most powerful conventional force in the region. And number four, break apart their rivals, or put their rivals in a position where they're heavily dependent on the United States. This is what they've done with Jordan and with Egypt. Jordan and Egypt have hardly any maneuver room vis-a-vis Israel because they're economically dependent on Uncle Sam. And Uncle Sam has told them that if they challenge Israel in any way, the United States will make them pay economically. So that's how you deal with Egypt and Jordan. And with countries like Syria, countries like Lebanon, countries like Iran, countries like Iraq, the basic goal there is to wreck those countries, to break them apart, to make them dysfunctional. And that's the second goal. That's the regime change goal when you dig down deep.
So let me ask you about that then.
That made perfect sense to me. I thought that was rather realistic. And here's the Middle East Forum.
The altar of security.
It seems to be overwhelmingly pro-Jewish, pro-Israel organization.
Sure, had no intent. There's like cleanup in aisle 4. And so they backtracked from that pretty quickly.
Victoria, you're frozen?
No, she's not. Come on, hurry up.
Am I still frozen?
Show here. No, stop it. Just get to the point.
Sorry about
Bloody
that.
Hell.
No, but Putin retracted or recanted those comments by Medvedev. Said Russia was not planning to give Iran a nuclear weapon. China's been pretty clear that they're not going to do that either. I think the North Koreans would be happy to sell one, but as we all know, their equipment isn't the best. And so, that's probably not what the Iranians would want anyway. And I think the silence from all of them on this, and the fact that they haven't done anything material to help Iran. I mean, Russia is somewhat limited because of the Ukraine war.
This is my greatest concern: how much China will resupply Iran.
They don't have kind of access through Syria that they used to have. And China really can't project power the way we can. And that is, I think, the critical message there is we can do something you didn't know we could do it, and you can't do it. So that is very helpful. And I think on top of that yes, that is a very specific deterrent, particularly for a Chinese incursion against Taiwan. But for Russia, they don't have the kind of access increase through Syria that they used to have. If the Europeans and China really can't project that power the way we can, and that is, I think, the critical message there is we can do something.
Oh, bloody hell! Just hit the wrong button.
Much harder for him to look at taking a bite out of Poland or Estonia or Finland or any country with a border sharing his that is a NATO member. So I think those two things in conjunction send a terrific message to Crink. And there was really good reporting in the Wall Street Journal. I think it was yesterday, might have been the day before, about the fissures within that grouping. I hate to call it an alliance. I think of it like Spectre from James Bond. So that seems to be weaker than we might have thought 6 months ago because of these actions.
Thanks, Victoria. To John.
Okay, that's a hopeful analysis.
Curious what your take is on the relationship between the university culture, and what we see more broadly culturally today.
I think it's pretty clear that wokeness, woke culture, social justice, victimhood culture, if you want to follow Campbell and Manning, it has its origin in the university. That's where it comes from. We can just kind of trace that historically. It leaks out, if we want to use that kind of analogy, through people leaving the university and then going and occupying positions in corporate America or other kinds of institutions, NGOs, the state, all of these kinds of places. The fact that so many Americans pass through institutions of higher education is part of this.
So it's hard to imagine that we're at the end of the Israel-US war with Iran. All right, abundant evidence that this war will resume probably in 2 months, say the blokes over at the Enforcer. So if you want to follow war, that's my favorite channel. So following the Ukraine war, any breaking war. Check out the blokes at the Observer, the Enforcer. Okay. Oh, bloody hell. Come on, dudes. We'll just start
the Islamic Republic of Iran. This is coming at the identical time as another Hezbollah commander has been hit and killed today by Israeli airstrikes within the region of southern Lebanon.
And this aired about 12 hours, 15 hours ago.
Outside of that, we have been able to see that U.S. armed forces and their presence within the Middle East are being expanded, as we can see the construction of new U.S. military bases within the area of Saudi Arabia, along with the continued operations of the USS Carl S. Vinson within the CENTCOM's area of responsibility. At the exact same time, we've also been able to see ongoing developments inside of the Islamic Republic of Iran, as air defense fire has been reported in the city of Shiraz, along with westward regions of the Islamic Republic of Iran. We have also been able to hear that the Islamic Republic of Iran is now denying the IAEA officially any access into the Islamic Republic of Iran to be able to inspect any nuclear sites throughout the country. We have also been able to hear inside of Tehran that apparently the Mossad was the one who opened the doors to the prison that allowed for the political prisoners to escape in the middle of the war that was going on between Iran and Israel just a few weeks ago. We also have ongoing statements as well by the President of the United States that is saying that if the Iranians attempt or continue to enrich uranium, the United States will join in with the Israelis to bomb the Iranians a second time. This is also coming as the United States of America has an intelligence ship 100 miles off the coast of the People's Republic of China, just north of Yanqing and south of Qingdao. We do understand this vessel is most likely gathering some sort of intelligence and signals data on the People's Republic of China at the moment, and it's incredibly interesting and quite blatant as the United States actually published its exact location about 100 miles off the Chinese coast within international waters just earlier today. Outside of that and inside of Europe, we have been able to hear that there is now civil unrest breaking out in Serbia in large numbers by the civilian population, as it does appear that they are starting to show their unhappiness with the Vučić government, which has been in charge of Syria for some time.
Wait, that's not what I want. Let me find a better timestamp.
Story too. If you only had a small number of people going through this, it'd be very difficult for that group of people to kind of take over the general narrative of the whole society, or at least half the society, one of the two political parties inside that country. So I think just the sheer numbers of people moving through is part of the story.
Okay, let's fast forward here. The Enforcer website, their latest coverage of the war.
As it does appear at the moment that the Islamic Republic of Iran is still going to be working towards nuclearization, and that pretty much means that the United States of America and Israel will still see that as a non-option, at least, or a significant issue is another way to put it, that the Iranians are working towards that again, and they'll begin the airstrikes to continue to put their nuclear weapons programs into the dirt if it's possible through airstrikes alone. We have already been able to hear that the Israeli government is now beginning to plan the new waves of strikes that will be conducted, at least according to All Arabia, as they stated that Israel is planning a second round of strikes on Iran, which will be significantly more destructive than the first wave of attacks, showing that at least according to information that has been issued to All Arabia, they are saying that apparently the Israelis will be looking to possibly conduct decapitation attacks against the Iranian government at the highest levels, as that is really the only way that Israeli airstrikes could be more damaging to the Islamic Republic of Iran than the last wave of attacks. In the last wave of attacks alone, the Israeli Air Forces were able to destroy a significant amount of Iranian air defense, a significant amount of the Iranian Air Force, a very large amount of the Iranian higher levels of command. Not the highest levels, but the higher levels of command within the IRGC and the Iranian military. They also destroyed several nuclear facilities on their own, including the Natanz facility, the IR-40 heavy water reactor at Iraq. We also know that they were able to hit and damage the Parchin facility. They also destroyed missile production facilities at Rasht, or largely a carbon fiber factory at Rasht, significant to the production of those ballistic missiles, as well as a ballistic missiles production factory to the eastern side of Tehran. They also, I mean, like, the list goes on and on. I could actually list off everything that they hit. That probably would be an incredibly long list, a little bit too long to mention here, because that's even just the first tenth of the list that I mentioned right there. But it does appear that, at least with the statements that are being made by Al Arabiya, it does seem quite clear that the Israelis can only have one option to make the attacks more devastating and damaging to the Iranians than the last attacks, which was to go after the very highest government officials in the Iranian government, including the president of Iran, the supreme leader of Iran, the Ayatollah, who actually holds all of the power. The president's more so just a figurehead for the country to make it look like there's some sort of a democratic process, but it does appear that at the moment, the Israelis are preparing for a new wave of strikes. Not only that, we are already seeing that the Israelis are still conducting a significant amount of airstrikes on Hezbollah forces, as we were able to hear that this guy here, which they almost made like, by the way, this is his rest in peace picture, but it almost looks like it's a baseball trading card picture. But the IDF stated that an Israeli drone strike killed Hezbollah commander Abbas al-Hassan Wabi in southern Lebanon today. Wabi, a Radwan Force intelligence chief, was involved in weapons transfers and rebuilding of Hezbollah's capabilities. If his portrait is supposed to be similar to that of a baseball trading card, then the Israelis hit a home run today, because they were able to take the guy out quite clearly, and it does appear that the Israelis are continuing their campaigns against Iranian proxy forces in the country. Oh, by the way, I forgot to show y'all the vehicle that he was once in. That's all that's left of it. It appears that he went the way of Anakin Skywalker's, well, actually Luke Skywalker's parents in the original Star Wars movie. I believe that's Star Wars 4: A New Hope. Very unfortunate.
Yeah, what is that? That looks like just like the engine and maybe just like part of the transmission or something is left. Everything else is literally turned to like dust and vapor. That's wild.
You know, we need to find who the manufacturer was of that transmission and engine block, because apparently they make them with a great deal of quality. The rest of the car and the Hezbollah commander and their structural fortitude, a little bit questionable, but it does appear that the engine and transmission did survive largely intact. But moving on from that, and out of that little bit of news there, at least for that Hezbollah commander, gone and hopefully forgotten quite soon, we have also been able to hear of new U.S. efforts within the region to build up our forces and presence within the area, as we were able to hear that the United States of America will soon be opening up LSA Jenkins for military operations within the area of the Red Sea. We were actually able to get some information on this today, and some of y'all who are members of the Lee Spring Army would think I'm kidding. There's no way that they're calling this LSA Jenkins. No, I'm not joking. It's actually LSA Jenkins, but it does not stand for Lee Spring Army Jenkins. It stands for Logistical Support Area, but still, it is called LSA Jenkins. We can see that, at least from satellite pictures that were provided today, that there is a lot of construction that is currently ongoing within the LSA Jenkins Logistical Support Area. This logistical support area is just outside of the significant Saudi Arabian city, and let me make sure that I get it here. Let's see, where the hell is it? Oh my God. You know, folks, the coastline here in Saudi Arabia is a very difficult one to follow. It's just south of Yanbu. Actually, that's where it is. It's somewhere down here south of Yanbu. But outside of that, it does appear that they will be starting to build up this base for the maintenance of multiple forces, including the Patriot and THAAD systems and TYP-2 early warning radars that are currently being based inside of Saudi Arabia. These bases will be able to allow extended U.S. air defense operations within Saudi Arabia and the entirety of the Middle East, because it does appear that at the moment, the United States Armed Forces are preparing to have an extended air defense presence within the region, and also greatly expanded well on into the future years or decades that the United States will find it strategically important and crucial to remain within that region. We've also been able to see further pictures of the USS Carl S. Vinson conducting operations under CENTCOM's area of responsibility. And of course, I have to say, Navy photographers do some of the greatest work out there of taking pictures of the Navy's assets. Take a look at the USS Carl Vinson. You can actually see a couple of vital aircraft up there on the deck, or as we would like to call them, vital. You can actually see some of the U.S. Navy's F-35Cs up on deck, alongside the F-18 Super Hornets, which are also on deck as well on the USS Carl Vinson. You can also see a picture here taken from the flight deck of them preparing some of the Super Hornets for their flights from the steam launch catapults on the forward part of the deck, or the forward part of the vessel. We can also see here the flight crew launching one of these F-18s off of the flight deck, and we can also see here a Navy Osprey landing on the deck of the Carl Vinson after conducting an extended operation near to the area of the carrier. It is an incredibly interesting thing to see these pictures come out. Once again, the Navy takes, in my opinion, some of the best pictures in the armed forces. They have a knack for taking incredibly good pictures. The Army...
Okay, got some more analysis here on the Middle East war. This is Gadi Taub talking with Michael Duran from the Hudson Institute.
And that the Turks are the Azerbaijanis, the Baluch, the Kurds, the Turkmen that these are not elements of the Iranian nation, that they are separate nations themselves, or at least some of them are. We have to wait and see. I don't know how it's going to play out.
We're running out of time, and I think you have to go at the top of the hour. So I will just say a few words, and we'll save a segment for this separately in the next show, because it's amazing what's happening with the Israeli press. The Israeli press had just had their own Yom Kippur, and everybody saw that, and this is not the first time they were wrong. And it's amazing how, the amount of trust that people have in the press can collapse from a pinprick if the balloon is too tight. And this happened in the United States in 1 hour in the debate between Trump and Biden, when everybody saw that Sharp's attack when you're one-on-one was just a lie. But it was not the first lie. It was just one lie too much and one lie too obvious. And so suddenly the bubble burst. And suddenly you saw things that were happening before, but you refused to see. And like nobody cares what they're saying on CNN if on Joe Rogan someone says the opposite, and many more people listen to it. Yeah. And as you know, this has been happening here too. As you know, now Netanyahu gave a bunch of interviews after the victory, but all during the war, he gave none to any of the television stations except my podcast. And it was, as you know, aired also on our channel with English subtitles. That's our most viewed show, but it's nothing compared to how many views I got on my Hebrew channel for it. And I think what happened was they were wrong about one thing. They were wrong about the question whether or not the United States was going to intervene. And there can be an honest mistake here. So why was that the Yom Kippur of the whole industry? It's because suddenly it was so abundantly clear that they were giddy about Trump deserting Netanyahu. They were making victory laps, saying, ha, 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 America would not intervene. Ha, 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 you went into this adventure, you risked everything, and there's no exit strategy and whatnot, while the war was actually going on well. And suddenly you looked back at the whole event from October 7, and you saw these people, and I by the way, I made a 10 seconds clip that just exploded on Israeli social media. I said, you were not wrong. You failed because you did not try to explain Netanyahu's policy. Maki, it's in the middle. You tried to sabotage Netanyahu's policy, and you failed. It's not that you were wrong. You failed. And it suddenly was so obvious. Look, they were attempting to finish the war without victory at every single step. Yes. From before Rafah. If they had their way, and remember, they were warning against regional war. And looking back, we needed a regional war in order to get Iran. And so they tried to... for them, it was more important to have Netanyahu lose than to have Israel win. Yeah. And that became so obvious that people just viciously turned on them. And I think that, the fanatics, the never Bibi camp, the Bibi derangement syndrome camp, they're hopeless. And now they're saying Iran's nuclear facilities would be reconstructed in 5 weeks or whatever, everything in order to minimize victory. But it doesn't work. And just today, there is a street parliament, very sweet, of working class people sitting on King George Street. And they come every Friday, they come there and they open a table and bring, pitzuchim, like, what do you call pitzuchim in there?
Nuts, no? I mean,
nuts and sunflower seeds, and they discuss politics. And they were split half and half against Netanyahu. And now I can have filmed them actually. And they were singing "Bibi Melech Israel," "Bibi King of Israel," because ordinary Israelis whose common sense is far more on the mark than the sophisticated analysts in the anti-Bibi.
Notice the same populist themes, the same anti-elite themes, the same critical perspective on the dominant elite here in Israel as you do in the U.S.
Studios, that they just said, this guy said to me, look, he brought the war to a victory in Iran. That's enough. That's enough. He was right all along. And that's...
Right, All In podcast.
Make it okay in your mind, or would you rather see me not get involved in this?
Can I up-level this slightly?
Sure.
I think that this has been probably the most important week, and I would almost say most important few months in U.S. politics in 30 or 40 years. And the reason is that it starts to converge a bunch of things together that I think are really worth putting on the table. So from my perspective, I think what President Trump has done is almost single-handedly bring back the United States as the global superpower. And I would put that in all caps. So what does it mean to be a superpower? I've said this several times, but just to be slightly redundant. In order to be a superpower, I think you need to have three things, but they work in a hierarchy. The first is that you need to have technical supremacy. And then from that technological supremacy, you need to establish and project economic supremacy and military supremacy. So if you look at the first one, you saw a tactical demonstration of technological supremacy with the B-2 bombers. But taking a more general step back, if you look at the largest companies in the world, who are the ones that are actually driving the world forward? These are all American companies. I think these last few months, you've seen America firing on all cylinders technologically. Economically, at the same time, you now have the stock market back at all-time highs. You have interest rates incredibly starting to compress, even in the absence of the Federal Reserve willing to act on data. So you're projecting economic supremacy. And then these last few weeks, frankly, have been a pretty clear-cut case of military supremacy. And so I think what's pretty simple now is like the U.S. is essentially telling the world our words carry weight again. We're going to shape the global order. Countries will now have to calibrate their actions around what the U.S. is willing to tolerate and what it isn't willing to tolerate. And in the case of Iran, the president made those lines, I think, really crystal clear. He warned them 100 times where the line was. And he was clear. You cannot build nuclear weapons. And when the line was crossed, and look, I think the CNNs of the world want to debate that the line wasn't crossed. All I can tell you is I don't know because I don't have access to the intel. I believe what he and Tulsi Gabbard and J.D. Vance and Marco Rubio and Pete Hegseth are saying is that they crossed the line, and then he showed that he will use decisive military force when that happens. But then here's what's crazy, and this is where I think you become a real superpower. It's what happens after. Once you cross the line, you notice that he doesn't try to humiliate or dominate Iran. He tells Iran that he wants them to stabilize themselves. He told them that he wants to see them trading oil with China. He wants to see them improving the lives of their people because he realizes that a stable Iran is a stable Middle East. So I think it's really amazing. And then the fact that he was able to bring Israel and Iran, who's been on the verge of some kind of conflict for decades, and broker a ceasefire, it's a really important moment, I think, in American history. I really do think that if you look at my little framework, it is the closest thing for us to being able to say that we are truly a clear-cut, singular, hegemon global superpower again. And that.
Hey, America is back, baby. I'm a regular listener of the Dan Senor podcast. So here we go.
Even with those within the MAGA movement and those around the president, that when the U.S. needs to take care of business, it can. And when Israel needs to take care of business, it can. And it can do it with pretty, not zero, but pretty low risk and pretty low cost to both the U.S. and Israel. So there's a sense that we keep in mind, Nadav, before Saturday night, even I'd say before 13 days ago, there was all this speculation about the horror show that could erupt if there was a war against Iran, an Israeli war against Iran, a U.S. war against Iran, an Israeli-U.S. war against Iran, that it would thousands of Americans would be killed, and military bases and personnel throughout the region would be at risk, and oil prices would just skyrocket, and America would be in another quote unquote forever war. And so that it was that was speculation. There was no basis upon which to actually argue for or against that until the proposition is tested. The proposition was tested Saturday night. So now the U.S. knows it has tools at its disposal, and I think those who were advocating to the president, both in his inner circle, the six officials the three of us have talked about before, who I think were the only ones in the room, among those who are advocating action, and then others outside the immediate ring, people like Senator Lindsey Graham and others, Senator Cotton, I think their stock has gone up considerably. And so the proposition now has been tested. The model has been tested. So I think short of getting bogged down in a war, the U.S. can take action again with pretty high level of confidence. Go ahead, Amit.
Can I just add to this from an Israeli perspective, from a political analysis? I think what President Trump did here was to actually do what was considered to be mission impossible. He had two pledges. One, that Iran would never have a nuclear weapon. And the second is that he would end wars, not starting it. And there was an alleged contradiction. How can you bomb a country and then promise to end wars? And what President Trump did here was brilliant, because he actually bombed Iran, thus leading to the end of the Israel-Iran war, and maybe, hopefully, the entire war in the Middle East that began on October 7th. Now, that's the reason why he said this morning he didn't want to risk this unbelievable achievement with a miscalculation. He didn't want Israel to retaliate, because then he was under the impression that Iran would have to retaliate and something might come up and it would escalate rather than de-escalate. That's why Netanyahu chose to actually go with the orders, advice, requests of President Trump. And then I would like to add something more. Nadav talked about the fear of hubris. And I would like to speak about the fear of pessimism. I think we still don't understand the miracle that had happened here. The miracle that took in 12 days the most severe threat ever posed to the Jewish state since its establishment in 1948. The fact that a fundamentalist regime almost possessed a nuclear weapon aimed at Israel only became more horrific when you see what they were doing over the last 12 days with their ballistic missiles. And the fact that they did it with their weapons of limited destruction would lead us to think what would they have done had they have a weapons of mass destruction. And that's why I think the history would not remember this last segment of Trump versus Bibi and the fighter jets on the way to Tehran. But the entire Middle East will see that the United States of America, for the first time in history, stood against a nuclear superpower in the making and adopting the Begin doctrine after the late Prime Minister Menachem Begin that said that Israel, and now the U.S., would never allow a Muslim country, a dictatorship, to have a nuclear weapon in the Middle East.
I completely...
And I got my first super chat of the day. Kamadov says, 50-character limit for super chats, a bit low. Well, this is one area where I'm not going to go to war with the ruling class.
Completely agree with that. It is so easy to forget, like, just the historical nature of this. And the other point I would add is, well, I want to talk to you guys about, does this inch us closer to Saudi normalization? I don't want to suggest it's going to happen imminently, but I don't think you can overstate the point that one of the complaints I would hear from Saudi officials over the last few years as to why, or certainly over the last year, why they weren't prepared to leap in to normalization was they weren't sure exactly where the U.S. was. That, like, because to normalize with Israel is to take on certain segments of the Arab street and is to be at risk, you know.
Okay, let me just go back to this talk here on diversity.
The fact that these are powerful people because they have credentials, they have skills that employers are interested in, and they bring their political ideology with them. Some employers aren't real interested in what their woke employees may have to say, but others are. And I think they are because they just are an overwhelming force. Like publishing, I think, is a great example of this, right? The fact that the publisher of Roald Dahl's books decided that they just had to hire a sensitivity reader who was going to correct all of the troubling language in Roald Dahl's books is, I think, fantastic evidence of this, right? The state is not forcing them to do this. They think it's the right thing to do. Why do they think so? Because everybody who works in these organizations, especially in places like publishing and especially in NGOs, are all of a similar kind of viewpoint. They all agree on not just one or two issues. It's a vast array of issues. You have to have the right kinds of...
All right, this is from, I think, Friday afternoon. Mark Halperin hosted two-way conversation.
Do you think it's right to think of the United States as a Judeo-Christian nation?
Yes, that was our founding principles.
Okay, and
that doesn't mean other people are excluded, though.
What does it mean then? If we're a Judeo-Christian nation, what does it mean to you?
Well, we were founded on Judeo-Christian principles. That every person is an individual, every person has God-given rights, and that the government cannot take those rights away from us, such as women's rights, gay rights, freedom of speech, and things that are not allowed in Muslim theocracies. Okay. Some of them are coming around.
Yep.
Some are.
Yes, exactly right there. Gay rights is you could not find a more fundamental Judeo-Christian principle than gay rights.
Of ideas on transgenderism, on same-sex marriage, on climate, on race relations, on police, on all of these kinds of things. And so it becomes this overarching kind of cultural formation that is going to have a lot of power in places where you have a lot of professionals and a lot of kind of endeavors that are highly susceptible to the manipulation by professionals. That is, it's kind of hard to know, what's the value added of what you're doing? How can I really know if you're kind of working real hard all day? That's a lot of what professionals have extracted from.
An excellent critique there from political scientist and author Darel Paul, Darel.
Be somebody to get in there to watch it. There was not.
Okay, I found this a provocative perspective from Haviv Rettig Gur talking to Mr.
Humanity had a problem. There were reports, there was intelligence that at Dimona, the Israelis were building a nuclear program that was going to build bombs.
And they didn't want the Israelis to build bombs. At the same time, they couldn't just be allies with the Arabs because the Arabs were siding with the Soviets and the Cold War was, at its height. And so the Israelis were socialist, even communist, but very pro-American. They were America's guy, like it or, not, in the Cold War. But they were also desperate Jewish refugees who thought they needed a nuke to survive as Arab armies continuously invaded them. And so they're building a nuke, and America doesn't want them to build a nuke, but it can't stop them from building a nuke, while at the same time, the Arab armies are being armed by the Soviets with brand new weapons, brand new MiGs, brand new tanks, and they're coming up. The American policy to thread the needle through all of that problem was the bear hug. And it begins with Kennedy. In 1962, there's the sale of Hawk missiles to the Israelis, surface-to-air missiles meant to tackle these new Russian MiGs that are coming into the Arab armies of Iraq, Syria, and Egypt. And that's the beginning of the American pivot to a military alliance with Israel, an arming of Israel, and treating Israel as a close military ally. Lyndon B. Johnson doubles down on that. Nixon already signs a proper alliance. I mean, really builds it out into an alliance. But LBJ already adds planes and tanks into the mix. Israel became an American ally in the Cold War for Cold War rationale. And Israel then was held close to America in this bear hug, mainly to rein it in. There's a fear that Israel, that thinks of itself as a wounded tiger threatened on all sides, well, it's going to develop these weapons. It has a competence that the countries surrounding it for various reasons of political culture, whatever, don't have. And if it feels threatened, it can lash out in destabilizing ways that could destabilize the Middle East and destabilize the oil supply and destabilize the Cold War, whatever. So America's solution was hold it close, give it the qualitative military edge over its enemies, make sure they feel safe, and then they don't go out and lash out, right? I argued, by the way, we had this debate in Israel and about Trump abandoning us, because 2 weeks ago, people don't remember, it looked like he had abandoned us. And I argued that means that Israel has to go it alone, because guess when America comes in to help? When Israel goes it alone, when Israel becomes the wild card, the joker that they don't know. So then they come in and they hug Israel. Why did Biden come to Israel after October 7? Yes, he has this sentiment. He kind of likes the Israelis. Yes, it's like an old Democrat thing and because of his age and generation. But those aircraft carrier battle groups that he sent into the Eastern Mediterranean, their primary purpose was not to deter Hamas and Hezbollah and Iran from attacking Israel and joining the Hamas attack. That certainly was part of it, because that would lead to a massive destabilization and deterioration of the situation. Their first purpose was to convince the Israelis everything was okay, everything was stabilized, don't start bombing the crazy shit out of everybody around you. It was a sense that the Israelis are a wild card. That dynamic is the rationale. Beginning of the Cold War, still there today. The Israelis are independently strong, and the Americans don't want them to be destabilizing. At the same time, the Israelis are utterly loyal to America. They're deeply in love with America. When Trump won the election, his first term, he had something like 70% approval in Israel. And when Obama won his first term 8 years earlier, he had something like 70% approval in Israel. Israelis don't understand the culture wars in America and the political fights in America. What they understand is that the world order America built is the safest, happiest, and most prosperous world order there has ever been. And that's something a lot of American dependents and allies don't understand and actually don't like America, even as they depend on America. So, long story short, you have a loyal, good ally. You want stability, make it feel safe. There are crazy ideologies in the Middle East that want to kill it. It could go very bad very fast if they come after it. You want to cut us loose? 67 was a war fought without America. We bought some weapon systems, but we were not that close of an ally. We didn't get military aid. We can handle ourselves without America. But there's reason for the American alliance. And so idiots who don't, it's not that they don't know my history. These idiots don't know their own history, their own reasoning, their own Cold War story of how America functioned in the Middle East. And if they were to learn it, they wouldn't have to agree with it. You don't have, I respect isolationists. I respect people who say I don't have to keep spending money on the rest of the world to protect everybody else. I do deeply respect that. But don't assume that your own country are a bunch of idiots for generations and generations being led by the nose by a country the size of Austria. That is not what is happening. And if that's all you know, you don't know yourself.
Yeah, and also to point out that the two previous times that the Israelis struck nuclear facilities in Iraq and the Osiris reactor was 81, I think. And
yeah, that worked pretty well when Israel took out two previous nuclear reactors. Right, back to Darel E. Paul, political scientist, talking about diversity, a managerial ideology.
Society. You have to give us lots of autonomy. And the promise is, if you give us lots of autonomy, we're going to produce all kinds of great things for your society. But it's really hard to kind of constantly look over the shoulder of professionals and make sure they're doing, X, Y, and Z. You kind of have to step back and trust them. And that gives them a lot of power.
So one audience member asks, and I'll just go ahead and read the question. They ask, what is your take on the debate between Burnham, that's James Burnham, and his young followers, whether the core of the new class is to be seen in the managerial class alongside the government bureaucracy or the broader intellectual class of academic and media or similar institutions, or does your professional class category provide the middle term for them both? I think maybe a good way to put this question is who counts in this this professional class, or perhaps you could you give us like a taxonomy of elite classes relevant to what you're talking about?
So in my same-sex marriage book, I go through what may be to some in painful detail. Thankfully, it's only in an appendix on how I exactly define these kinds of things. And so the professional class is much bigger than the managerial class. A lot of the taxonomy that I use comes out of sociology, and it's a taxonomy that is used now in the British government statistics, and you can kind of import that stuff into other countries like the United States. Taxonomies about jobs and positions in jobs. To make it kind of the most bluntly, if you will, there's two relations to capital. Either you own it or you don't. The vast majority of people don't own capital, right? They're not owners of corporations. So that's not particularly interesting because it's probably like 99% to 1% or 98% to 2%, whatever. And I'm not talking about, I have a TA, a CREF fund, and I've got stocks in that. That's not what I'm talking about. Actively managing corporations. What's more interesting is how much autonomy you have in your job, and therefore how much and also how much authority you have over other people. Managers have a lot of autonomy and a lot of oversight over other people, and professionals have a lot of autonomy, generally not so much oversight over other people. If they did, that would kind of make them managers, but they have a lot of professional or shall we say specialized skills. And this taxonomy divides it in between upper and lower. So you'll have higher managers and lower managers, higher professionals, political scientists at Williams College, for example, doctors, lawyers, psychiatrists, these kinds of people. Lower professionals might be K through 12 teachers, social workers, et cetera, et cetera. This is the kind of taxonomy that I use that just comes out of some branches of sociology and is used by the British, as I said, the British state in their census categories. So I think it's useful to separate the managers from the professionals, because even though they share a lot, they're also different enough. They have different positions inside any capitalist economy. Therefore, they have some different interests, and I think understanding what capital requires you to separate those two from one another. I think Burnham is really interesting, and I like Burnham's work. The thing is about Burnham is that it seems to be a way for Americans to not have to read any foreigners. Right? Foreigners have been writing about class relations for forever. Burnham is kind of this big American figure who writes about it. I think Burnham's great and all, but I don't think we need Burnham, and I don't think we need to keep resurrecting Burnham's ideas to talk about class in America today.
Your discussion of professional class makes me think of a question that I've had for a long time based on my own, my day job as somebody who researches kind of the ideological pressures in higher education. I would say, and I say this having, spent the last 2 years reading just thousands of university documents related to DEI, that the discipline most invested in DEI is medicine. Medical schools are far and away, more than law schools, more than any humanities departments or disciplines. Medical schools seem to be the most invested in promoting social justice. I mean, to give just one example, the UNC School of Medicine, which is pretty highly ranked, in 2020, they immediately after students made demands, they created what they called the Task Force for Integrating Social Justice into the curriculum, and it included steps that would seem radical in any area of the university. This was they had a list of required core concepts that professors needed to adhere to in their lectures. They had a list of political and social causes that they thought students should learn how to advocate for. They decided to put DEI into their promotion and tenure policy, which is a pretty common thing for medical schools to do now. It's common in general in higher education, but medical schools are one.
So there are a lot of great interviews with Darel Paul scattered across YouTube. Here is one on the victory of the LGBT movement.
Darel, should we start by talking about your piece about drag for First Things,
yes,
which I thought was superb. I read it at the time and then I reread it because I knew that we would be speaking. And there's a lot in there, but I suppose should we start by talking about the stunning popularity of drag among liberal straight women as a cultural phenomenon?
Yeah, that I think was maybe it wasn't completely surprising to me, but I think the intensity of the interest was a bit shocking. Yeah, I wrote the piece, well, in part because the editor of First Things saw that this was kind of a strange cultural phenomenon, and a political one, too. I mean, drag became this sign of political resistance to Donald Trump, and so it all seemed quite odd. And so I was kind of excited to dig into it and did lots of research. My kind of social science-y nature came out in that piece, so I spent a lot of time watching RuPaul, which I had never watched before, so I got an education that way as well. Yeah, and so I guess what I kind of came to conclude was that this was something that was certainly cultural. It was something about especially young straight women who saw in drag a certain kind of cultural phenomenon and association with feminism and gender expression and whatnot that they found really appealing. And then I think it got much broader because it was seen as a way to attack masculinity, and Donald Trump as being the signature symbol of, at least, over here we call it toxic masculinity. And so it was a way to attack Trump as well. So I think it served both of those purposes quite well.
I thought that was a really interesting insight, that the appeal of drag is not gender subversion as such, at least to these women. The appeal of drag is that it is anti-masculinity. I've not read...
All right, let's have a look at some comments here by Kip. He says, 4 weeks without mowing, I'm feeling free as a bird. And I thought about 40 when Doug Casey mentioned non-Jews possibly converting for personal gains. Then he admitted identifying as a Jew nowadays might be a PR nightmare due to his connection with the sadistic state of Israel. So whatever the Jewish state does will have profound repercussions for Jews all over the world. When the Jewish state is portrayed as engaging in a sadistic and vicious manner versus the Palestinians and its enemies, then it does put Jews in peril around the world. And that is what's happening right now. Also, people never act for any one pure motive for anything as profound as a conversion to a new religion, right? There's a whole bunch of psycho story going on, and there is social standing, and there is true belief, and the quality of your connections, and perhaps a desire to get married.
I read that insight before, and I read it, and I immediately thought, yes, that's true.
Yeah, I came to that conclusion because certainly the roots of drag are in anti-masculinity. I mean, gay men, it's very effeminate gay men who like drag, right? Masculine gay men don't engage in it and don't particularly enjoy it, as far as I could tell. And so it is an attempt to subvert masculinity by mocking it, to perform in a male body femaleness as a way to... The claim is not to mock femaleness or not to mock femininity, but to mock masculinity. Of course, I think what really happens is it winds up mocking femininity as well. But I think that most of the straight female consumers of drag don't see it that way. They see it only as this mocking of masculinity.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think to some extent they're oblivious to the, slang like fishy or whatever. I think that a lot of the women who enjoy drag just don't really register it.
No, some of the stuff is really misogynistic in my opinion.
Yeah. Can I tell you a funny story? I went to a drag queen story hour.
Okay, I'm going to fast forward through her funny story. And maybe I'll fast forward through AOC commentary. Oh, let's hit humor.
Does camp also have to be humorous to some extent, or at least non-serious?
I think
I don't care about that.
I'm surprised to hear that camp is ever...
Okay, I don't really care about The Simpsons. What else do we have here? Political utility. Yes.
Could you expand on that, the political utility of this?
Sure. So the way I put it in the book is maybe a bit crass, but it's a useful stick with which to beat your enemies. And certainly in the 1990s and the 2000s.
So you don't want to have a big meal before you live stream, but I didn't eat enough. And so you really burn through a ton of energy doing live streams. And I'm really fading now. For the past hour and a half, I've just been fade.
the enemies were cultural conservatives. I mean, I think they're still enemies today, but there's just not that many cultural conservatives in America. And what count now, at least, maybe from the perspective of Britain, it looks like there's a lot of them. But from how many there used to be 20 years ago, there's a lot fewer. Mm-hmm. For example, you'll see lots of Republicans now who are happy to identify as Republicans, vote Republican, but they're not particularly conservative when it comes to cultural issues. Mm-hmm. Anyhow, the kind of prominence of cultural conservatives in the 90s and the 2000s was such that same-sex marriage and homosexuality in general was a really nice distinguishing cultural marker. We, the left, were for it because we know that the right is against it. And of course, everybody was against it in the 1980s. You can see that in the polling. But things began to change in the early 1990s, and they kind of transform all throughout the period after the early 90s. And so the left uses homosexuality as a cultural marker of difference and a highly moralized marker of difference to say, we are good and you are bad. And I think it's largely effective over time, right? It takes a while. It takes probably 15 or so, maybe 20 years to unfold. But by the end of that period, it's pretty successful, I think. I think the evidence shows it.
That is a profound point.
Many of you will know that Christianity is a subject of fascination for me, and the role of Christianity in shaping the modern world
Stop it. Okay, there's our ad. Let's get back.
Yeah, the thing that you outline very persuasively is the way that it is top down. Two other possible theories, neither of which work, I think. One is that it was entirely a consequence of a kind of moral awakening across society, where people encountered gay men and women in their lives or through media or whatever, and experienced a kind of moment of conversion, and that this happened in a very widespread and non-class stratified way from the 90s onwards. Okay, that would be one theory. I think you make it very clear that that's not the case, that you do see this really trickling down the class hierarchy very distinctly. Another might be that the homophobes died off, and that the new generation had just never been exposed to homophobic ideas, perhaps, and so they didn't imbibe them from a young age. And there's probably more truth to that latter story, but I think it is clear from your data that actually people changed their minds, and quickly.
I think so. I'm happy to address both of those. The first one in the social sciences is usually called the contact hypothesis, right? That people who don't know another group of people have negative views of them, but as soon as they get to know them, they have social interactions with them, they change their minds. They see that, they're just like me. And so therefore the polling data will change a lot through.
Right. That's the dominant explanation often by elites and by academics in the mainstream media for the victory of the LGBT movement. Just contact with these wonderful gay couples.
Contact. I think it's just false. The evidence for it is very, very weak. And there's lots of counterexamples.
Right. So the number one explanation for the triumph of same-sex marriage has absolutely nothing to do with reality.
And one of the counterexamples that I talk about, especially in terms of toleration, which is kind of a big theme around homosexuality, certainly in the 80s, 90s, and into the 2000s, is that there are lots of people that the left very much doesn't like, and they don't become more tolerant. They don't become more tolerant of people that they call Christian fundamentalists. That tends to be the term that's used in polling. And so I think the contact hypothesis just doesn't have any good evidence behind it. And certainly if anybody wanted to challenge me, that go read the sections of the book where I talk about it. The second, I think you're right. The generational change, I think that does have some validity. The problem with the generational change argument, though, is that if you look at the data, the polling data, there are very clear breakpoints. Things are very, very stable all throughout the...
And it's very difficult to hold an elite position and enjoy elite privileges if you express any qualms whatsoever about homosexuality.
70s, the 80s especially, and it's very negative towards homosexuality in the 80s until the very early 90s, and then something happens. It's almost like a dam breaks, and you can just see the lines of opposition begin to just crash and fall. That can't be a generational change in something that happens over the course of 5 or 10 years. And so there is a dramatic cultural change going on. And so some of the things I talk about in the book are the changing view of the media, and the prominence of gay characters in lots of television shows, the way that the major newspapers treat homosexuality and same-sex couples, and then also the importance of the professions. You see some real transformations in psychiatry and psychology. You see it in the law. You see it, as I said, in media, and you see it in...
Right. After survival, for most people, their strongest urge is towards status. And you simply cannot climb in status if you publicly express any qualms about homosexuality.
Towards it.
What do you think was the role of dechristianization in triggering this elite response?
I think a big role.
Right. And you cannot have religious freedom growing together with gay rights. Religious freedom and gay rights are locked in a zero-sum conflict. And gay rights has risen as religious freedom has substantially decreased in America.
Because the left, I don't think the left thought of it so much as de-Christianization, but they certainly thought of it as an important means to undermine, I guess, what they might call conservative Christianity or fundamentalism. And these are words that were used freely and openly. Right? This is very much the intent. The kinds of things that Vice President Dan Quayle represented in the early 90s, or televangelists, which were much more prominent in the 90s, and certainly they are today. Mm-hmm. And so I think it was, very much a cultural project to undermine those kinds of institutions and those kinds of values, aided, of course, by lots of Christians, because there were lots of mainline Protestants who were also very opposed, identify themselves as opposed to other Christians. So, for example, the local Congregationalist church here in my town always celebrates January 6th. Why do they celebrate January 6th? Because it is their opportunity to protest against what they call Christian nationalism. Their primary enemies are other Christians who have the wrong kinds of political views. So there's lots of different people who were aiding in this bigger cultural and political project.
See, that Christian response is the more mysterious one, because you can understand why people who have been very secularized, which of course is happening concurrently with all of this, church attendance is dropping, all this stuff is happening at the same time. Very secularized people, you can see why they would latch on to gay rights as a stick with which to beat their enemies, as we've talked about already. It's more mysterious why some churches would embrace this. I mean, yes, I guess a stick with which to beat other denominations. Christians love doing that.
Bomb.
But it does still seem like quite a significant departure from the historic church teachings.
I think it's because they're elites, and they're elites first. So one of the tables I have in the book is a documentation of the income levels and educational levels, on average, for various American denominations, not just Christians, but also some non-Christians too. And there is a pretty good correlation between the degree to which a particular denomination is full of elites, by which I'd say rich people and people with higher education, lots of higher education, and their acceptance of homosexuality, or I'd say their normalization of homosexuality in their own churches, in terms of allowing partnered gay people to be ministers on the one hand, and then on the other to approve of same-sex couples through ceremonies. After a certain time, obviously, marriage itself. And those are highly associated with being elites. So this is Reform Jews, this is Episcopalians, this is Presbyterians. In the U.S., they're a very elite status, and so they absorb elite views. I think the fact.
And men and women have very different reactions to male homosexuality. Right? Heterosexual men tend to have a natural aversion and disgust towards it, while women find it less threatening.
That they're Christians is not super important to this story, although the institution that they express those values through are churches.
I have long had a theory, and I don't know whether it's possible to combine this with the elite theory, one that you're positing, that one of the reasons for this incredible movement that we're describing of people becoming much, much more tolerant of homosexuality in a really short period of time is feminization of institutions. That I think that women, I mean, there is research, including research which monitors people's physiological responses to images of gay and lesbian people, i.e. completely unconscious responses. There is research demonstrating that men are a lot more homophobic than women are. And I wonder whether the influx of women into public life, which really is a 1990s phenomenon. I mean, it starts in the 60s and 70s, but it doesn't really get going. I mean, you look at the proportion of mothers who are working outside the home and really get to the 1990s onwards thing. I wonder if it's that actually which mostly explains at least the institutional shifts towards being less homophobic in media and even in churches. That's also the period where you start having women in positions of leadership in churches more frequently. One, do you think that might be persuasive? And two, how might that fit with what we clearly see with the top-down process that you describe?
Certainly the most culturally liberal people, I guess I define that as views on homosexuality, views on immigration, views on the death penalty and crime and punishment, all these kinds of things. The most liberal people in America certainly are highly educated women, hands down. And so I think you're right that it's not coincidental that the normalization processes come through fields that tend to have a lot of highly educated women in them, especially.
I never fail to be disappointed how people who work in muscular professions, such as assembling machinery or landscaping or construction, how widespread and even casual the homophobia is. That plumbers and landscapers and construction workers and men on the assembly line just feel so at ease with uttering statements of homophobia. Incredibly distressing.
Mental health professions, right, which are very, very female dominated. And obviously not so much in the 70s and 80s, but when they kind of come to accept normalization.
I love it that whenever I go to a therapist, they're always super pro-gay. And whenever I meet a social worker, they couldn't be more pro-gay.
But over time, one of the things I note in the drag queens piece is that librarians are overwhelmingly female. And so I think it's, again, no coincidence that you have institutions that are dominated by highly educated women tend to be very, very friendly towards, or if you want to be more social science, kind of more normalized or promote a normalization project.
But unfortunately, heterosexual men tend to feel disgust with Drag Queen Story Hour. But thank God for the women. They see the beauty in that cultural contribution.
I guess the larger question then is why? I think the data is very strong on this, but the larger question is why would that be the case? And so that's a good question, and I think an important one. I suspect that when men, I'll just say this on average, right? When men think of homosexuality, I think they're going to think of sexual behavior much more so than women. And I think women are going, when they think of homosexuality, they're going to think of emotions, practices of camaraderie and social support and whatnot.
Right. Women think of the wonderful parts of gay culture, like the more open and refined and sensitive and sophisticated expression of camaraderie, appreciation for culture and art, more refined expression of emotion. And men, right, they think of vast promiscuity and glory holes and piss orgies. Sad. I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.